The night the blackout hit, everything felt like it was slipping away, bit by bit. I still remember how the day had been unusually hot for early fall, the kind of oppressive heat that makes you sweat even when you're inside, and the air feels thick and heavy, pressing in on you from every side. I was living alone in a small apartment on the second floor of an aging building, the kind with creaky wooden floors and thin walls that let you hear every footstep, every whispered conversation. It started in the late afternoon, just after I got home from work. The power had been flickering off and on for the past few days, but I didn't think much of it. Old wiring, overloaded circuits, or the city's struggling grid, I assumed. But this time, the lights didn't come back on. The second the lights went out, the hum of my refrigerator died, the air conditioner stopped rattling, and the clock on the microwave blinked off into total silence. The apartment felt suddenly hollow. I checked my phone. No signal, no bars, nothing. I walked over to the window and peered out. The street was pitch black. No street lamps, no headlights, no signs of life anywhere. The usual murmur of distant traffic was gone. Even the barking dog a few houses down was silent. It was as if the entire neighborhood had vanished along with the power. I lit a candle and sat by the window, watching. A couple of neighbors were out on their porches, the orange glow of their candles flickering in the thick darkness. I thought I might go downstairs to check the lobby or look for someone who knew what was going on, but the idea of stepping out into that unnatural silence stopped me. By nightfall, the heat was unbearable. Without air conditioning or even a breeze, the apartment felt like an oven. I opened a window, hoping to catch some relief, but the air outside was still and heavy, and the darkness seemed to seep in like a physical thing, thick and suffocating. Around midnight, the first strange thing happened. I was lying on the couch, trying to keep calm, when I heard a soft knocking at my door. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate. I froze, listening. The hallway was pitch black and empty when I peeked through the peephole. No one there. I told myself it was probably just a tree branch brushing against the door or some odd noise from the old building settling. But then the knocking started again, this time from the window. I turned toward the glass, my candlelight flickering wildly as a cold breeze swept through the room. There, standing just outside on the fire escape, was a figure. Tall, slender, unmoving. The dim light didn't reveal any features, just a dark silhouette. I blinked, and it was gone. My heart pounded so hard I was sure it would burst. I locked the door and drew the curtains shut. I couldn't stop looking at the windows, feeling like those unseen eyes were watching me. Waiting. The next day, the blackout was still total. The entire neighborhood was silent and empty. I finally ventured outside and saw abandoned cars, open doors to stores with no one inside, and the strangest thing, a thick fog that wasn't there before, clinging low to the ground and muffling sound. I met a few neighbors on the street who looked as scared as I felt. No one had any idea what was happening or when the power would come back. Phones and radios were useless. People started whispering about strange shapes moving in the fog, about voices heard in the night, about the feeling that something was watching. That night, the shadows grew bolder. Figures appeared at the edges of vision, too tall, too thin, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. They never moved fast, never made a sound, just stood and watched. I tried to confront one when it came close to the streetlight outside, but it vanished like smoke. Inside the apartment, things got worse. Doors creaked open by themselves. Items I was sure I'd left on tables or shelves moved to other places. The knocking at the door and windows never stopped, growing louder, more urgent. I lost track of how many nights I spent hiding, clutching a kitchen knife, listening to the whispers seeping through the walls. Sometimes I thought I heard my own name being called, but when I responded, there was only silence. Food ran out. Water became scarce. The heat was relentless. I couldn't leave because outside was no safer. The fog had thickened, and those figures seemed to fill every corner, waiting in silence. On what must have been the 6th day, I woke to the sound of a scream coming from the apartment next door. I rushed over, pounding on the door, but no answer. The scream came again, this time low and garbled like someone struggling to speak. I knocked harder, shouting, but the silence that followed was even more terrifying. The next morning, that apartment was empty. No sign of the occupant, no note, no belongings, just an open door swinging on its hinges. By the end of the week, the neighborhood was a ghost town. Doors left open, dishes still on tables, beds unmade. The silence was suffocating. I didn't know what kept me alive: fear, stubbornness, or something else. But I kept going. On the eighth night, the knocking stopped. The whispering ceased. The figures disappeared. For the first time since the blackout began, I felt a strange stillness. Not peace, but something worse. Then the power came back on. Lights flickered, air conditioners buzzed, and the hum of the city slowly returned. But it was different now. The city was no longer the same place. People were missing, doors left unlocked, an emptiness that hung in the air. I moved out shortly after. I couldn't stay. Sometimes when the power goes out for even a moment, I see those eyes again in the corners of my vision, in the dark corners of rooms, and I still hear the knocking. The blackout wasn't just an outage. It was a doorway. And whatever was waiting in the dark, it's still out there. Story the end. The summer of 2014 was one of the hottest in recent memory for Boston. I had recently moved into a small apartment in Dorchester, close enough to the city center to walk to work, but tucked away enough to have some quiet. My building was an old brick structure, 4 stories tall, with creaky wooden floors and thin walls. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. I worked as a late shift nurse in a nearby hospital, usually finishing around midnight. One particular Friday night, the heat was suffocating even inside the hospital. The air conditioning was barely keeping up and the halls felt sticky. Around 11:45 p.m., just as my shift was ending, the power suddenly cut out. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the hallways in an eerie red glow, but the hum of machines and monitors stopped abruptly in many areas. The hospital's backup generators kicked in almost immediately, but some parts of the building were still affected. Communication was patchy, and the staff was scrambling to manage the situation. The blackout was citywide. I could see from the windows that outside, streetlights had gone dark, and cars were pulling over. After my shift, I tried calling my apartment to check if the power was on there, but my phone had no signal. Worried, I decided to walk home despite the heat and the growing unease. The streets were dark and unusually silent. No passing cars, no neighbors on their porches, just the distant sound of sirens. As I turned onto my block, I noticed something odd. The street lamps were dead, but on the sidewalk, I saw footprints in the dirt leading towards the alley behind my building. They were fresh, and strangely, they stopped abruptly about halfway down the alley. Curious, I cautiously looked down the alley and saw nothing but darkness. I called out softly, but got no response. I decided not to investigate further and headed inside. The building's interior was pitch black. I fumbled for my keys and used the flashlight on my phone to find the lock. As I stepped inside the stairwell, I heard a faint whisper, almost like someone calling my name. I stopped and listened. The stairwell was empty. My heart raced, and I quickened my pace up to my apartment on the 3rd floor. Inside, the air was thick and still. I opened all the windows and turned on my portable fan, which worked on batteries. Then the knocking started. Soft at first, then growing louder. It came from the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. The building was supposed to be empty, except for me. I moved to the door and peeked through the peephole. No one was there. I backed away, but the knocking continued, now from the back window. I shined my flashlight outside and saw a shadowy figure standing just beyond the glass. It didn't move. Panicking, I locked all doors and windows and called the police, but the line was dead. The knocking stopped suddenly. The silence was crushing. Hours passed. I stayed awake, clutching a kitchen knife. At dawn, the power returned. I looked outside. The street was alive again, but there was no sign of the figure. The next day, neighbors told me there had been a series of break-ins during the blackout. I never forgot that night. Story the end. The power had been flickering on and off for a few days, but no one in our neighborhood thought too much about it. It's an old town, full of homes that hadn't been rewired since the 70s, and the summer heat was pushing every AC unit and fan into overdrive. I just moved into my new place, a small rental house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac on Green Hill Drive. It was a plain, single-story house with a carport, creaky floorboards, and paper-thin walls. Still, it was cheap, and after a rough breakup and a job transfer, I was grateful for the quiet. The blackout hit on a Thursday evening. I'd been home from work for about 20 minutes when everything snapped off. It wasn't gradual. There was no warning flicker this time. The lights just went dead, my fan stopped spinning, and the hum of the fridge vanished into silence. At first, I thought it might be my circuit breaker, but when I stepped outside, I saw the whole neighborhood dark. No porch lights, no street lamps, just the faint rustle of leaves and the chirp of crickets. A few of the neighbors stood outside on their lawns, casually chatting and speculating. I waved to an older man across the street who I hadn't met yet, and he called out, "Power's out all over. Might be the whole town." I went back inside and lit some candles. It was already warm in the house, but the absence of power made it feel stifling. I cracked a few windows open and poured myself a glass of lukewarm water. I was about to sit down with a book when I heard a knock at my door. It was my neighbor, Erica, a woman in her early 30s who lived next door with her son, Liam. She looked uneasy. "Hey," she said, "do you have any service? My phone's not working." I checked my phone. No bars, not even Wi-Fi. "Yeah, mine too. I can't even get GPS. This is weird, right?" "It is," I admitted. "Usually, even during blackouts, I still have mobile data." We talked for a few minutes and agreed to check in on each other later. She mentioned she was going to drive into town to see if it was just our block or the whole area. I watched from my window as she loaded Liam into the car, but when she turned the ignition, nothing happened. The engine didn't even try to start. It was just dead. That was the first moment I felt something was wrong in a deeper way. Over the next couple of hours, the situation became more surreal. More neighbors tried to start their cars, and none of them worked. Landlines were dead. People began knocking on doors, gathering in driveways. One man, Todd, walked around with a hand-crank radio, but it only played static. By sunset, the cul-de-sac was buzzing with low murmurs and flashlights. No one had heard from anyone outside. A few of the guys tried to walk down to the gas station about a mile away, but when they came back, they looked shaken. "It's shut down," one of them said. "No lights, no people, and the weird part? There were cars just abandoned on the road, like people had stopped driving mid-trip." "Were there any police? EMTs?" someone asked. "No, it's like no one's out there." I felt cold despite the heat. I went back into my house and locked the door. I kept telling myself it was just a strange power outage and communication failure, that things would be fine in the morning, but that they weren't. That night, the sky stayed pitch black. There was no glow from the city, no distant streetlights. It was complete, consuming darkness. Even the stars seemed muted. I tried to sleep, but sometime around 2 a.m., I was woken up by a sound. A scraping, metallic sound near the back door. I froze. At first, I thought it was a raccoon or something, but then it was followed by a heavy, dragging noise, like something being pulled across the concrete. I got out of bed quietly and crept to the kitchen. My back door had a window with thin blinds, and I peered out. There was a man standing in my backyard. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, maybe 20 feet from the door, staring straight at the house. He had no flashlight, no phone, just him, standing, motionless. I backed away. Every instinct screamed at me to not make a sound. After what felt like an hour, though it was probably only 5 minutes, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the black. I didn't sleep at all the rest of that night. In the morning, I knocked on Erica's door. She looked pale and sleep-deprived. I asked her if she saw anything strange. She hesitated, then told me she'd seen someone standing at the edge of her yard too, just watching. Over the next couple of days, things got worse. The food in fridges started to rot. We resorted to canned goods. Everyone started boiling water over fire pits they built in their yards. We tried to stay calm, but people started to unravel. Some of the older folks had medical conditions. No power meant no machines, no access to prescriptions, but worse were the people that started appearing at night. By the third night, we were all hearing things, knocking at windows, shuffling in the bushes, and always the watchers. People who appeared after midnight, standing silently at the edge of our properties, never crossing the line, just watching. They never spoke, never moved quickly, just stood. We tried to confront them, but they always disappeared into the darkness without a sound. One man, Dave, a younger guy a few houses down, decided to stay up with a bat. He said he was going to wait for one of them to approach and scare them off. In the morning, his front door was wide open. No sign of Dave. Blood on the carpet just inside. No footprints. No struggle. He was just gone. Erica started keeping Liam in her room every night. She covered all the windows with blankets. I started doing the same. I don't know why, but it felt like if we couldn't see them, they couldn't get in. That same day, I went outside to ask if anyone else was missing. That's when I saw the writing. On the street, near the curve of the cul-de-sac, someone had written in big black letters, "The dark is not empty." It hadn't been there the day before. No one admitted to doing it. Todd freaked out, started accusing people. Everyone was on edge. That night, the sounds got closer, a scratching along the walls, whispering through the vents. I couldn't tell if it was in my head or real. The fifth night, it changed. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a noise inside the house. Not outside, inside. Footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. I grabbed the crowbar I kept near my bed and opened the door quietly. The footsteps stopped. I stood there in silence, heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. Then I heard breathing. Coming from the living room, I crept forward, every step feeling like I was walking through molasses. The air was thick, and the darkness inside the house felt unnatural, like it was swallowing the light from my flashlight. I stepped into the living room and saw nothing. Just my couch, my table, my front door. Then the breathing stopped. I swung the flashlight to my right and saw the outline of a person crouched in the corner, their back to me. They weren't moving, just hunched there like an animal. I stepped back. The floor creaked. The thing snapped its head around, and its eyes, wide, black, and impossibly hollow, locked onto me. It let out a sound like static and charged. I slammed the bedroom door just in time and jammed the crowbar under the handle. Something slammed against it from the other side. Once, twice, then nothing. I didn't sleep. In the morning, the door was intact. No marks, like nothing had happened. But that was when I knew it wasn't people watching us. It was something else. By the seventh day, half the cul-de-sac was empty. People just vanished. Doors left open, cold meals on tables, no signs of escape or struggle. Just gone. Erica begged me to help her and Liam leave. We decided to try walking through the woods behind our homes, cut across the lots, maybe hit a highway or find another town. We packed backpacks, flashlights, food. We left at noon. The woods were unnaturally silent, no birds, no wind, just the crunch of our feet. Liam held Erica's hand tightly, and I carried a baseball bat. I kept feeling like we were being followed, but every time I turned, there was nothing. After 2 hours, we came to a clearing and found ourselves back at Green Hill Drive. We hadn't turned. We walked straight. But somehow, we'd gone in a full circle. Erica started crying. I felt numb. That night, we barricaded ourselves inside her house. We nailed furniture over the doors, covered the windows. We heard the watchers outside, but we didn't open the door. In the dead of night, something whispered through the cracks in the wall. "You can't leave, not anymore." I looked at Liam, and he was staring at the ceiling, eyes wide. He whispered, "They're inside the lights, and now the lights are gone." It's been 3 more nights. I'm the only one left now. Erica vanished yesterday. I turned my back for 5 seconds, and she was gone. Liam just kept staring at the wall, repeating, "They wait for the dark. They feed in silence." Now he won't speak at all. And tonight, the candles are starting to go out, one by one. I can hear them just outside the room. I don't know how long I have left. If you're reading this and the power's out where you are, get out. Don't wait. Don't assume it'll come back on, because once the lights are gone, so are the rules. And the dark isn't empty. Story the end. It happened during one of the hottest summers I'd ever experienced in Texas. I remember because the heat didn't just settle outside, it got into everything, like it was trying to boil us from the inside out. I was staying in an old apartment complex just south of downtown Dallas. Not the safest area, but it was cheap, and I didn't have much choice back then. My job barely covered the rent, and most nights I just came home, microwaved some leftovers, and tried to ignore the muffled yelling from the neighbors or the endless sirens echoing from the freeway. The power grid was already strained that summer. The news kept warning about rolling blackouts, and people were told to conserve electricity. I tried, but the AC was non-negotiable. Without it, my apartment turned into a damn furnace. So when the blackout hit on a Saturday night, I just thought, here we go. It was about 9:30 p.m. I just finished washing dishes, had the TV on low, and was thinking about taking a shower before bed. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out entirely. The hum of the fridge and the box fan cut off instantly, leaving this dead silence that I hadn't noticed was even there before. Outside, I could hear confused voices from the neighboring units. I figured the whole block had lost power. I grabbed my phone to use the flashlight and saw I had 22% battery left. I cursed myself for not charging it. Then I dug around in the kitchen drawers and found a cheap plastic flashlight I'd bought during a hurricane scare the year before. It still worked, though dimly. I stepped out onto the small balcony just to see how widespread the blackout was. It was complete. Every building around mine was dark. The only light was the sickly orange glow of a half moon, barely cutting through the humidity. From the balcony, I could hear a man shouting in the parking lot, something about his car not starting. Other neighbors were out too, people talking across balconies, a couple lighting candles, someone trying to use their phone flashlight to fix something on the ground. I didn't recognize any of them. I kept to myself most of the time. I went back inside and locked the sliding door. Then I started to feel something that hadn't occurred to me before. Not fear exactly, but discomfort. There's a weird kind of quiet that only happens during blackouts, not just because the appliances are off, but because people instinctively lower their voices, like they're trying not to disturb something that might be listening. That's how it felt. I sat on the couch with the flashlight balanced on my shoulder and scrolled through my phone, but there was no service, no bars. That was strange. I had service in the building even during storms. I tried rebooting the phone, still nothing. When I checked the signal again, it just said SOS only. I didn't have much else to do, so I walked to the bedroom, found some candles in a drawer, and lit one. I placed it on the nightstand and just sat on the bed. That's when I heard the first noise. A dragging sound. Not from inside, but out in the hallway. Not footsteps. This was something slower, like something being pulled across the floor. I froze. My apartment was on the second floor. The hallway outside was narrow, with maybe 6 other units. I hadn't heard anyone talking out there when I passed by earlier, but now there was this dragging noise. It stopped. Then a knock, 3 sharp knocks on a door down the hall. Not mine. I waited, but no one opened. Then silence again. I held my breath, listening. Another knock. This time it was closer. I stepped into the living room and turned off my flashlight. The room fell into darkness. I crouched beside the window and pulled the curtain just slightly. There was someone standing in the hallway. Not moving, just standing there. They weren't holding a flashlight or using a phone, just standing, back turned toward me. I couldn't make out any features, just a silhouette in the dark, barely visible in the moonlight. After what felt like a full minute, the figure moved to another door and knocked. Slow, deliberate. 3 knocks again. Nobody answered. I was about to turn away when the figure shifted slightly and looked over its shoulder, right toward me. I stepped back, startled, heart hammering. The knock came again, closer now. I knew the next door was mine. I backed into the bedroom and grabbed the candle, hand shaking. I didn't want to answer the door. I didn't want to speak. I didn't want them to know I was inside. Then came the knock. My door. 3 heavy, deliberate knocks. I didn't move. They didn't call out. They didn't try to open the door. They just stood there. I could see the faint outline of their shadow under the door frame. Standing still. No movement. No sound. They didn't go away. After what must have been 10 full minutes, the shadow finally moved. I waited another 5 before I dared to look out the peephole. No one was there. The hallway was empty. I went back into the living room and relit my flashlight. I turned off the candle. I didn't want any light that could give away where I was. That's how uneasy I felt. Then something caught my attention. The balcony door. It was open. I swore I'd locked it. I know I did. I walked toward it slowly, heart pounding in my ears. I pulled it shut and locked it again, but I didn't see anyone outside. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned back to the living room, and the flashlight cut out. I smacked it, but it didn't come back on. I reached for my phone to use its light again, but it was dead now. Completely dead. No low battery warning, no red blinking light, just gone. I was in total darkness. I stood perfectly still, trying to listen for anything. Any creak, any breath. The AC hadn't kicked on, the fridge was off, even the neighbors had gone quiet. Then something else. Breathing. Not mine. Behind me. I spun around, heart in my throat. Nothing. I reached blindly toward the kitchen, hoping to find another candle or match. But as I moved, I heard something shuffle near the bedroom, then a soft sound, like cloth dragging across the carpet. I turned toward the sound, eyes straining, and then I heard it. A whisper. A whisper so close it was almost in my ear. Don't move. I froze. My legs locked. My skin crawled with cold sweat. The voice was not mine. It wasn't even familiar. I stood like that for what must have been 20 minutes, afraid to breathe, afraid to blink. When I finally moved, I crawled to the front door. I didn't dare stand up. I slowly turned the lock and opened the door just wide enough to slip into the hallway. It was empty and pitch black, but it felt safer than my apartment. I ran barefoot down the stairs and out into the parking lot. A few people were gathered there, neighbors with candles, one guy holding a camping lantern. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know how to explain what had happened, so I didn't. I just stood there. Someone asked if I was okay. I nodded, unable to speak. One of the women there, an older lady from the unit below mine, said she'd seen someone walk up the stairs about an hour ago. Thought it was weird because he wasn't a resident. Just a tall man in a long coat walking up into the darkness. The lights didn't come back on until after 4 a.m. When they did, I went back to my apartment. Everything looked normal. The flashlight worked again. My phone turned on. The balcony door was still locked, but I found something that didn't belong. On my kitchen counter, sitting perfectly centered, was a single black feather. I don't own a bird. I don't know where it came from. I moved out 2 weeks later. I never got an explanation. The complex said no one else reported anything like that. The power company said the blackout was part of a planned grid failure. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was just heat exhaustion and paranoia. Or maybe when the lights go out and the world falls silent, something else steps in to fill the void. I don't know, but I'll never forget that whisper. Don't move. Story the end. It was a brutally hot August evening, and the air was thick with humidity, the kind that made your skin feel sticky just standing still. I was living in a third-floor apartment in a converted brownstone in Trenton, New Jersey. My roommate Adam and I had been sharing the place for almost a year, and while we both worked opposite shifts, he was a night shift security guard, and I worked days at a local hardware store. We rarely crossed paths except for weekends. That Friday night, he had taken the weekend off, and we were planning on watching some horror movies, grabbing cheap wings from the bar down the street and doing absolutely nothing productive. It felt good to look forward to something so simple. Around 6:30 p.m., just as I was getting out of the shower and towel drying my hair, the lights flickered once. Then they cut out completely. I heard the bathroom fan die with a slow whir, and the little nightlight in the hallway blinked off. For a second, I stood completely still, the dripping water from the shower head echoing in sudden silence. "Adam?" I called out. No answer. I opened the bathroom door and stepped into the hallway. The whole apartment was dark, unnaturally so. Not even the blinking light of the router was on. The fan we usually kept running in the living room was dead quiet. I walked into the kitchen, grabbing my phone off the counter. The screen came to life, and I checked the time, 6:42 p.m. The battery was at 73%. I swiped through to social media and then to Google to see if there was a local power outage. The service was painfully slow, but eventually I found a local news post from 3 minutes ago. Widespread power outage in Mercer County. PSE&G investigating cause. Estimated time of restoration unknown. Whatever, I figured it would come back in an hour or two. I walked over to the living room, found the old battery-powered lantern we kept under the couch, and switched it on. A dim yellow glow filled the room. That's when Adam burst through the front door. He was panting like he'd sprinted from the parking lot, shirt damp with sweat. His face was pale and his eyes wide. I immediately thought he'd been in a car accident. "Jesus, man, what happened?" I asked. He stared at me for a long second before saying, "There's something wrong out there." "What do you mean?" "I don't know," he said. "It's not just the power. It feels off. The entire neighborhood is dead silent. No traffic, no people. It's like a ghost town." I walked over to the window and looked out. He was right. It was oddly still for a Friday evening. Normally we'd hear kids playing down the street or the ice cream truck making rounds, but there was nothing. just rows of dark houses and a slow-crawling dusk that was turning the sky orange and purple. I saw lights flicker out, one after the other, all down the block, like someone was flipping switches house by house, he added. I didn't know how to respond. We sat in silence for a bit, trying not to make each other more paranoid. Eventually, I decided to go check on Mrs. Caro, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment below us. She didn't have family nearby and sometimes needed help with things. I knocked on her door gently. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. I called out, "Mrs. Caro, it's me, Jordan. Are you okay?" No response. The hallway outside her apartment was completely dark, except for a dim glow from the stairwell emergency light. I tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. "Wait, are you sure you want to go in there?" Adam called from the top of the stairs. "I'll be quick," I said. Her apartment was a mirror layout of ours, but smelled like lavender and mothballs. I pushed the door open fully, letting the lantern light spill into the front room. "Mrs. Caro?" I stepped in slowly. It was dead silent, except for the faint creaking of wood settling. I moved through the living room to her bedroom door, which was ajar. Pushing it gently, I leaned in. Empty. The bed was made, the room looked untouched, but something was strange. All of her windows were open. She never left them open, not even a crack. I turned back toward the living room and noticed something else. Her back door was wide open. The screen door flapped lightly in the still air. I stepped onto the back porch and looked around. The yard was empty, and beyond it, so were the other houses. No lights, no sounds. No one. I came back upstairs shaken, but tried to keep a lid on it. "She's gone," I told Adam. Door was unlocked, back door open. It's like she walked out in the middle of something. He rubbed his face with both hands. "I think we need to leave." "Where?" "Everything's dark." "I don't know, but I don't like this." We gathered some flashlights, bottled water, and our phones. I even took my pocket knife, which I hadn't used in years, just in case. As we stepped outside, the silence hit harder than before. Not even the cicadas were buzzing. We walked 2 blocks toward the corner gas station. It was closed. All the storefronts were dark and empty. It was as if someone had vacuumed the people out of the town. Then, as we crossed Maple Street, Adam stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" I froze. For a moment, there was only the sound of our breathing. Then I heard it too, metal scraping. It sounded like it was coming from behind a nearby dumpster. We both turned our flashlights toward the sound. There was nothing there. Adam took a step forward. "No," I said, grabbing his arm. "Just wait," he whispered. We both held our breath. Then the scraping came again, louder this time, and followed by something else, a kind of whispering. It was low and fast, like static mixed with breath. We backed away, slowly at first, then faster. We cut through a few backyards and made it to the main road. There should have been headlights, passing cars, even distant honks, but there was nothing. The sky above us was cloudless, but the stars didn't look right. It was hard to explain, but they felt too bright and too still. We made it back to the apartment just as our lantern began to dim. We tried our phones again, but none of the apps were loading. The flashlight worked, but the signal was gone completely. We sat in the living room in silence. That's when the knocking started. It came from the front door, 3 sharp knocks, then silence. Adam stood up slowly and grabbed a fire iron from beside the heater. I moved toward the peephole and looked. No one was there. I waited a few seconds, looked again, still no one. We didn't open it. Instead, we turned off the light and sat in the dark, listening. The knocks came again, this time from the window facing the fire escape. I crept toward it and peeked through the curtain. There was someone, or something, standing there, but not fully. It was like a shadow had taken shape, but parts of it were vibrating in and out of focus. It moved like it was glitching. Then it whispered something. "Let us in." The words were wrong. The voice didn't sound like it belonged outside. It sounded like it was echoing from inside my own head. I stepped back quickly. Adam saw my face and knew. "We can't stay here," I whispered. We grabbed what we could and bolted out the back. We didn't look back. We ran for what felt like blocks until we finally saw something. A light. An actual light. It was coming from an old church at the end of the street. Candles glowed in the windows. We ran to it, knocking frantically on the heavy wooden door. A man answered. His face was wrinkled, eyes sunken, but calm. "You saw them too?" he asked. We didn't even answer. He let us in, locked the door behind us, and guided us to the main chapel. There were 6 others there, people of different ages, all sitting silently, eyes wide, as if they'd seen what we had. The man explained in a low voice that the blackout had happened before. Not often. Once every few decades, and it always started the same. Silence, the power going out, the people disappearing. They come in the dark, he said. They only need you to invite them. We stayed in that church until dawn, and when the sun rose, the lights flickered back on. We returned to our apartment later that morning. Everything looked the same, but Mrs. Caro never came back. Nor did several other neighbors. People just stopped asking about them. Adam moved out a few months later. Said he couldn't sleep in the dark anymore. As for me, I still live here. But I've never forgotten that night. And every time the lights flicker, even for a second, I hold my breath and wait to see if they come again. Story the end. It started just after 8:40 p.m. on a warm, sticky Thursday night. I remember the time because I had been watching a rerun of an old crime documentary on the couch with the volume low, trying not to disturb my roommate, Tara, who was on a Zoom call in her room. The living room fan spun lazily overhead, the air barely moving in the heat wave that had hovered over Tennessee all week. The documentary's narrator had just begun describing a grisly crime scene when the screen blinked out and the room dropped into complete darkness. Simultaneously, the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft whir of Tara's desktop cut off. Silence swallowed the apartment. A second later, I heard Tara say, "What the hell?" from her bedroom. Her voice sounded closer than it should have. It took me a moment to realize she had stepped out into the hallway. "Power just went out?" I asked, standing up. My eyes were still adjusting to the absence of light. I reached for my phone to use the flashlight. Yeah. My call dropped, obviously. Is it just us? I stepped over to the window, pulled the curtain back slightly, and looked out. All the streetlights lining our road were off. The entire block, maybe even more, had gone completely dark. No porch lights, no headlights, no distant TV glow in the windows across from us. I couldn't even hear a car engine. "It's the whole street," I said. Maybe more. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the second floor of an older complex built in the early 90s. Nothing fancy. Creaky floors, loud plumbing, and thin walls, but it was home. I'd never seen the place so utterly quiet. Even the usual hum of crickets seemed absent. Something about the darkness outside looked heavier than usual. The way it sat in the air, thick and unmoving, unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. I turned my flashlight on. The beam of light caught Tara's face, and she squinted, holding a hand up. "Geez, not in my eyes," she muttered. "Sorry." I tilted the phone downward. "You want to check the circuit breakers?" Tara shook her head. "If it's the whole block, it's not us. Maybe a transformer blew. I'll check Twitter." She pulled out her phone. We both stood there, our screens the only light in the room. Her face turned confused. "No service." I frowned. "Me neither. No Wi-Fi either. Must have knocked everything out." "Great." She sounded irritated, but beneath that was something more uncertain. "Want to check with one of the neighbors?" We grabbed a couple flashlights and stepped out into the hallway. The building was eerily quiet. None of the usual late-night TV shows echoing through doors, no barking dogs, no creaking floorboards overhead. As we walked down the corridor, it felt like no one else was home, like the entire complex had emptied. "Should we knock?" I asked, stopping in front of apartment 2B. The woman there, an older lady named Marlene, was usually up late watching TV, but no light bled from under the door. Tara hesitated. "Let's try. Maybe she has a generator or something." I knocked softly. No answer. Then louder. Nothing. "I'll try 2C, Tara said, moving to the next door. Same result. We checked 2 more doors, knocked, waited, even called out. The building felt hollow, like it had been abandoned hours ago and we were the last ones to realize. Back inside, we sat in the living room. I pulled out a couple of candles from the drawer and lit them. The flickering glow felt oddly comforting at first, but I couldn't shake the growing unease creeping into my chest. "You feel that?" I asked Tara. She looked at me. "Feel what?" "I don't know. Like the air is wrong. Like the air pressure dropped or something." She nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's too quiet." We sat there for maybe 10 minutes, trying to convince ourselves it was a simple outage. Maybe a local tower had gone down. But I kept checking my phone and it stayed on no service. Even airplane mode didn't fix it. And then we heard something from the hallway. A slow, dragging sound. Tara and I froze. It was distant at first, like someone slowly dragging their feet or something across the old wooden floorboards. The sound stopped, then started again, louder this time. We looked at each other. She mouthed, "What the hell is that?" I stood up slowly and moved toward the door, listening. The sound stopped. I waited, flashlight raised. Nothing. And then a knock. 3 slow knocks. Not from our door, from the other end of the hallway. Not rushed, not urgent. Deliberate. Tara backed into the kitchen, whispering, "Nope, I don't like that. I don't like that at all." I wanted to say something rational, something that would make both of us feel less like 2 kids in a nightmare, but I couldn't. I edged closer to the peephole, but the hallway was completely black, even under the dim glow of my flashlight. Then the knock came again. 3 knocks, but closer now. 2 doors down. I whispered, "Someone's going door to door." Tara's voice trembled. "Who the hell knocks in a blackout at night like that?" We turned off our lights. Complete darkness swallowed us. We stayed silent, breathing as quietly as we could. The next knock was on our door. Slow, heavy. The kind of knock that isn't asking to come in, it's letting you know they're already here. I stared at the door. I don't know how long we stood like that. Neither of us moved. The knock didn't come again. After maybe 10 minutes, Tara whispered, "I'm calling 911." She turned her phone back on. Still no service. I whispered, "Try emergency dial." She did. The phone buzzed, but then showed call failed. "I don't like this. We need to get out," she said. "Where?" "Car. Drive somewhere, anywhere, somewhere with power. Maybe downtown." We grabbed our keys, wallets, and phones. She carried a knife from the kitchen. I took the baseball bat from under my bed. We opened the door slowly, flashlights on. The hallway was empty, but one thing was off. Marlene's door, which had been closed earlier, now stood slightly ajar. I pointed it out to Tara. She shook her head. "Not our problem. Let's go." We made it to the stairwell, but halfway down, my flashlight flickered and went out. Tara's died a second later. Total blackness again. And then a whisper. A voice, low and dry, whispered something behind us. I turned, swinging the bat, but hit nothing but air. Tara screamed. She stumbled backward and fell, slamming into the stair rail. I reached for her, heart pounding. "What? What?" She didn't answer, just pointed behind me, mouth open. I turned. Nothing. Just darkness. We got to the bottom floor and sprinted to the entrance. The glass doors stood wide open, even though they were always locked after 9 p.m. Outside was worse, no lights anywhere, no noise, no movement. Even the sky looked wrong. There were no stars, no moon. It was just black. I couldn't see the parking lot until we were nearly in it. We found Tara's car, a small Honda Civic, and jumped in. She tried the ignition. Nothing. Battery was fine earlier. No reason it shouldn't start. She tried again. Dead. I tried mine. Same result. Every car we tried in the lot, nothing. And then we heard it again. The dragging sound. It was coming from the far end of the lot. We couldn't see it, but we knew it was moving toward us. We ran. Out of the lot, down the street. We passed 2 blocks, no lights, no people. It was like the whole town had vanished. The silence wasn't just unsettling, it was suffocating. We ducked into an alley to catch our breath. That's when Tara said something that chilled me more than anything so far. "I don't think this is a blackout." I looked at her, confused. "I think we're not supposed to be here." "What does that mean?" She swallowed, voice shaking. "I don't know, but when I fell on the stairs, when I hit my head, I saw something. For just a second, the walls were different, black, covered in these shapes. And the thing at the top of the stairs, it didn't have a face." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her it was just fear, stress, head trauma, but part of me believed her. And then we heard it again. The dragging. It was in the alley. We bolted, running until our legs gave out. We ended up in the park across from our complex. The place was normally full of kids, joggers, dogs. Now it looked like a graveyard. We stayed there until dawn. Except dawn never came. The sky stayed black. No light. No sun. And the whispering started again. It's been 3 days now. We haven't seen another soul. The food's almost gone. The whispers are louder. And at night, the knocking comes again. We don't know if anyone else is still here. But the truth is, we're starting to wonder if we're even alive. Maybe that blackout was the last normal moment we had. If anyone finds this, if anyone can read this, we're still in the town. We don't know what's real anymore. But something is in the dark with us, and it's getting closer. Story the end. It started with a storm warning. Thursday morning, the weather reports said a squall line was moving in from the west, with strong winds, heavy rain, and the potential for power outages across multiple counties. I was used to those kinds of warnings. Our town, Wilson's Bend, sat right on the edge of the woods, about 20 minutes from anything resembling a real city. Every few months, a storm would knock out the power, and the electric company would take its sweet time getting us back online. I live in a duplex with my younger brother, Ethan. We moved in together after our mom passed away 2 years ago. The rent was cheap, the landlord was invisible, and the place sat right at the end of a dead-end street that backed up to dense, swampy forest. Quiet, mostly. That Thursday around 7:30 p.m., the wind started howling. It wasn't the usual gusts. It had a kind of rising whistle in it, like someone screaming through clenched teeth. Rain slapped the windows and tree branches scraped the side of the house. We lost power right before 8 p.m. No flickering, just a total cut. Lights, TV, phone chargers, everything gone in an instant. I remember standing in the kitchen, reaching for the flashlight drawer just as the lights died. Ethan was already lighting candles in the living room, all the ones we kept for when the power went out. That's when we heard the first knock. It was a slow, deliberate knock. 3 times. Not rushed, not panicked, just steady, like someone with all the time in the world. Ethan froze in the hallway, halfway to handing me a candle. We stared at each other in the glow of the one he'd already lit. We weren't expecting anyone. We never had visitors, especially not during storms. "Maybe it's the neighbor," he whispered, across the duplex. But we hadn't seen the neighbor for over a week. He was an old man named Boyd, barely came out during good weather, let alone in the middle of a storm. The knock came again, still 3 times. Still slow. I took the flashlight and went to the door. I didn't open it. I looked through the peephole. But it was pitch black outside. No porch light, no street lights, no moon. The only thing I could see was the distorted round image of the storm-slick glass. "Who is it?" I called. Silence. The wind screamed. Rain hammered the roof. I waited, heart pounding. No answer. Ethan stood behind me, his candle flickering. "What did you see?" "Nothing," I said. "Could be a tree branch hit the door." We waited by the door for another few minutes. No more knocks came. Eventually, we stepped away, but neither of us relaxed. We didn't speak much the rest of the night. We set up our little blackout routine, candles in the bathroom and kitchen, blankets in the living room. The power wasn't coming back anytime soon. We tried to distract ourselves with a card game, played Go Fish for a while like we used to as kids. Around 10:30, we both dozed off on the couches. That's when the screaming started. I jerked awake, not sure at first if it was thunder or a dream. But Ethan was already sitting bolt upright, his eyes wide. It wasn't just a scream. It was someone shrieking outside, high-pitched, like they were being torn apart. We both bolted to the front window, pulling the curtain aside. Still pitch black. No lights, no movement, just the sound of rain. Then we heard it again. This time it was closer. Someone screaming from the woods behind our house. I stepped back. Ethan didn't say a word. "Maybe someone's hurt," I muttered, though I didn't believe it. "Don't go out there," Ethan said quickly. I didn't plan to. I locked the front door again, even though it had already been locked. My hands were shaking. Ethan grabbed a kitchen knife and tucked it under the couch cushion. After about 10 minutes, the screaming stopped. But then came the knocking again. This time it was at the back door. I swear, I almost passed out. No one could have gotten back there that fast. Our backyard opened directly into trees, and there wasn't even a real path. Who the hell would be out there during a blackout in a storm? I didn't go near the back door. We just sat there, paralyzed, until it stopped. We moved everything heavy we could find in front of the door, chairs, the small table, even a couple of kitchen drawers we yanked out. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it made us feel better. And then we heard footsteps, not inside, on the roof. Slow, dragging steps like someone limping. Wet footsteps squelching with each movement. It circled the house. Twice. Then silence again. I barely slept. Neither did Ethan. We just lay there on the couches, clutching flashlights that were already fading. Morning came gray and wet. Still no power. We stepped outside cautiously, looking for signs that someone had been there. The backyard was worse than we thought. Deep footprints, bare feet sank into the mud behind the house. Not just one set, multiple. They came from the woods and led right up to our back door, but there was something wrong about them. The toes were long, too long, not human. Ethan wanted to call someone, but both our phones had died. No cell towers working anyway. The whole town was out. We walked up the street, hoping to find a neighbor with a generator. Every house was dark, curtains drawn. We knocked on Boyd's side of the duplex, nothing. We stayed inside most of that day. We didn't talk about what we saw. We didn't go near the back windows. Around 5 p.m., it started raining again. At 7 p.m., the power blinked back on, just like that. Lights buzzed, appliances beeped, the house hummed with life. I'd never felt so relieved. We went room to room, checking that everything was working. I flipped the porch light back on. That's when I saw it. A handprint. Pressed into the condensation on the outside of the window, just above the couch where Ethan had been sleeping. 5 long fingers. Too long, too slender. Not human. The days after that were worse in some ways. Nothing happened the next night, or the next. But I started noticing little things. Every night after we went to bed, I'd hear movement in the walls. Not mice. Heavier. I'd wake up to find the hallway light on, even though I always turned it off. Once, I woke up and found the attic door hanging open. It hadn't been touched in years. One night, I heard whispering. Low, wet whispers, like someone gargling words through mud. I couldn't make them out, but they were coming from the vents. I stopped sleeping. Ethan changed too, got quieter, wouldn't go near windows. He taped towels over them, said he didn't want to see those things. When I asked him what he meant, he said they came back, that they never left. I didn't believe him. Until I saw them. It was almost 3 weeks after the storm. I got up in the middle of the night to get water. I passed by the front window. The porch light was still on, and there, at the edge of the forest, just beyond our backyard, stood 3 figures. Tall, skinny, motionless. They didn't move, even when I turned off the light. Ethan said he sees them every night. One time, he said he saw them closer, kneeling by the back door, like they were listening. He wanted to move. I did too. We tried to break the lease. The landlord didn't answer. We posted online looking for sublets. No replies. We couldn't leave. The car wouldn't start. Neither of them. The neighbor across the street came by a few days ago, said she hadn't seen Boyd in a month. She tried knocking. No answer. She said she thought she saw someone in his window, but when she looked again, it was just curtains. Ethan finally snapped last week, said he couldn't stay anymore, said he'd walk into town if he had to. He never came back. I filed a missing person report. Police said he probably just ran off. They searched the woods. They didn't find anything. But the night after they left, I found the back door open, just slightly ajar. There was a handprint on the inside of the glass. Long fingers. Wet. I don't know what's happening to me. I still hear the knocking sometimes. Always 3 times. Sometimes at the front door, sometimes the back. Sometimes from the inside of the walls. I don't sleep anymore. The lights flicker every night. Around the same time the power went out that first night. Even with the storm long gone, something about that blackout opened a door. Something got in. And I don't think I'm ever going to get it out. Story the end. The night the power went out, it had been oppressively hot all day. Not just warm, sticky, suffocating heat that clung to your skin and made every breath feel like a chore. I had just moved into my new apartment on the 2nd floor of an old brownstone building in Philadelphia. It was the kind of place that looked charming in daylight. Brick walls, creaky floors, clawfoot bathtub. But at night, it felt wrong. Not haunted exactly, just heavy, like the walls were holding on to secrets. I hadn't met most of the other tenants yet, except for a couple across the hall who introduced themselves as Maya and Julian. They were nice enough, seemed to keep to themselves. The old woman upstairs, Mrs. Ferris, I only knew from her loud classical music that bled through the ceiling every afternoon. That Thursday evening, I had just finished dinner, a bowl of oversalted ramen, and was about to start sorting boxes when the lights snapped off without warning. Not flickered. Snapped. I froze, listening to the sudden vacuum of silence left behind. Even the fridge had gone quiet, and the cheap window unit that had been blasting warm air sputtered and died. I walked to the window. The street lamps were out. The entire block looked dead. Blackout. I grabbed my phone. No Wi-Fi, but cellular data still worked. I checked Twitter. Power outages reported all over the neighborhood. Pico said a transformer blew. Estimated restoration, several hours. Nothing unusual, but still, something about it didn't sit right. I lit a candle I had packed for ambiance and sat in my living room trying to read, but the heat made my skin itch, and the shadows from the candle kept playing tricks on my eyes. I kept glancing at the hallway, where darkness pressed in like it had weight. The air was still, unnaturally still. I got up to open a window for some air. That's when I saw the man across the street. He was standing motionless under the dead street lamp, facing my building. He wasn't doing anything, just standing. I squinted, trying to make out his face, but the darkness blurred his features. He could have been anyone. But what struck me was his stillness, unnerving, inhuman. He didn't shift his weight or scratch or move his hands. He just stood like a statue. I stepped back, uneasy. Maybe he was just some guy, waiting for someone, waiting out the heat. But I kept the curtain drawn as I moved back to the couch. About an hour passed. The phone said 10:03 p.m. Still no power. My phone battery had dipped to 18%. I figured I'd try to sleep and hope the AC would kick in by morning. I blew out the candle and got into bed, just letting the ceiling fan blades sit dead above me. Then the footsteps started. Not from upstairs or the hall. Inside my apartment. I sat up so fast I got dizzy. My eyes hadn't adjusted yet, but I swore I heard soft, deliberate footsteps from the kitchen. I waited, holding my breath, trying not to make a sound. Another step, closer now. My heart was hammering. I reached toward the nightstand, feeling for my phone to use its flashlight, but in the dark, my fingers knocked it off. I heard it thud on the floor, then silence again. I stayed frozen in bed, ears straining. Nothing. No more footsteps, no creak of the floorboards. I finally summoned the courage to get up and crawl toward the phone. I found it, screen cracked, but still on. I hit the flashlight. The kitchen was empty, but something was wrong. My back door, the one that led to the fire escape, was slightly ajar. I knew I'd locked it. I always locked it. I stood slowly, light trembling in my hand, and pushed it shut, sliding the bolt hard. I checked the windows, all closed, all locked. I barely slept that night, jumping at every sound. When morning came, the power was back. The AC sputtered back to life, lights flickered on, the fridge buzzed. But I knew something had happened. Someone had been in my apartment. I filed a report with the landlord, who seemed unconcerned. Old buildings like this, the doors swell in the heat. Maybe it just popped open. I changed the lock myself. Got a metal bar for the door, bought pepper spray and a baseball bat, and for a while that was it. Life went on, sort of. I slept with the light on and kept checking the door multiple times each night. 2 weeks later, another blackout hit. Same pattern, same transformer, same pitch black void outside, and again that oppressive, pressing air. But this time I was ready. I had a flashlight, backup batteries, and a knife in the kitchen drawer. I lit 2 candles and waited, and around 10 p.m. I checked the window. He was there again, the man. Same spot, same unmoving posture. Only this time he was closer, just across the street, under my window. I turned off the candle nearest the window, hoping he couldn't see me. I called the police. They said they'd send someone to patrol the area, but couldn't do much during a blackout unless someone was actively breaking in. I watched the man for 10 minutes, then 15. Then he vanished. I didn't see him walk away. One moment he was there. The next, the spot was empty. I locked everything, secured the windows again, and sat in the kitchen, knife in hand, waiting. At 2:13 a.m., the power came back. The next morning, I went across the hall to check in with Maya and Julian. They were bleary-eyed but friendly. I asked if they'd seen anyone outside the building during the blackout. Julian frowned. "You too, huh?" "I saw a guy last time. Tall. Didn't move much. Creeped me out." Maya looked uneasy. "Last time it happened, we heard someone trying our doorknob, like testing it, slowly. Thought it was just a neighbor at first. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I left the hallway light on, slept with the fan running so I could hear if anything else disturbed the air. 2 days later, Mrs. Ferris didn't play her music. She was dead. Heart attack, they said. Natural causes. But she had a heavy-duty bolt on her door, one she always kept locked. Yet when the landlord checked in, her door was wide open. No signs of forced entry, no valuables taken, but all the lights were out. No blackout had been reported. I couldn't prove anything, but I felt sure it was connected. The man, the door, the dark. I took a week off work and stayed at a friend's place across town. I slept better there. The area hadn't had a blackout in years. I considered breaking my lease, but curiosity got the better of me. I went back one afternoon to pack some more of my things. The building felt quiet. Too quiet. My apartment smelled stale, like something had been rotting, but I couldn't find the source. The hallway was dim. As I stepped inside, I felt this sudden cold chill, uh, even though the air was sweltering. I grabbed the last two boxes and turned to leave when I saw a scrap of paper under my door. It wasn't there when I came in. I picked it up, just a torn page from a book, but someone had scribbled something across it in blocky handwriting. I see you in the dark. I bolted, called my landlord again, but he was dismissive. You young folks always think someone's stalking you. Probably just a prank. I didn't go back that night. I stayed with my friend again. The next day, I had a locksmith meet me at the apartment and replace every lock. I bought a battery-powered camera and pointed it at the back door. For a few weeks, nothing happened. Then a storm rolled through. Lightning, wind, heavy rain, and of course the power went out. I left the camera on. It had a backup battery. I checked the footage in the morning. At 1:46 a.m., the back door clicked open, slowly, quietly. A figure stepped into the frame. He was tall, gaunt, in a dark hoodie, face obscured. He didn't look around, just stepped into the kitchen and stood there for 4 full minutes. Then he turned directly to the camera and raised one hand, waved, then walked back out. That was it. I showed it to the police. They said it could have been a prank, a friend with a key, no clear face, no identifying features, nothing they could do. I moved out 2 days later, broke my lease, lost my deposit, didn't care. Months passed. I moved cities, changed numbers, tried to forget. But every now and then, when the power flickers, when the lights go out for just a second too long, I think I see him again. In reflections, in windows, in places he shouldn't be. Last night, my new apartment had its first blackout, and taped to the inside of my front door, where I know I never put anything, was another scrap of paper. I see you in the dark. Story the end. It was the last Saturday in July, and the heat had been unbearable all day. That suffocating kind of summer humidity where the air feels like wet wool clinging to your skin. By evening, the temperature barely dropped. The ceiling fans in my apartment spun uselessly, pushing the heat around instead of doing anything about it. I lived alone in a second-floor unit of a 4-story building in a quiet part of town, mostly working-class families, retirees, and the occasional loner like me. I was sitting on the couch, watching a rerun of something forgettable on TV when the power went out. It happened so abruptly that the entire room seemed to gasp. The TV snapped off. The fan stuttered to a halt. Every electronic hum in the apartment went silent at once. Then the familiar quiet of a blackout took over. The kind that settles in your ears like a thick fog, broken only by distant voices and the chirp of summer insects outside. I waited a moment, expecting it to flicker back. It didn't. A few neighbors opened their doors. I heard footsteps in the hallway and a couple of voices calling out. I opened my own door and looked down the dim corridor. The emergency exit lights were still glowing faint red, but no power anywhere else. "Hey, anyone know what's going on?" I called out. A guy from 3B leaned over the railing, phone in hand, the screen lighting his face. "Whole block's out, I think," he said. "I don't see streetlights either." I nodded and stepped back into my apartment, closing the door behind me. The air was already getting warmer without the fans. I lit a few candles, mostly half-burned ones I kept in the kitchen drawer in case of hurricanes. The soft yellow light filled the room, and for a while it wasn't so bad. Peaceful, even. I read a little by candlelight. Then I texted a friend to see if she had power in her area. She didn't. Apparently, it was a larger outage than I thought. I was halfway through typing another message when my phone screen dimmed and shut off. Dead battery. I cursed under my breath. No power meant no way to charge it either. By 10 p.m., the building had grown unsettlingly quiet. Usually, someone was always making noise, TVs, keys, kids, someone's music leaking through the walls. But tonight, it was as if the blackout had sucked the life from everything. It was too dark to do much. Even the candlelight had begun to feel oppressive rather than comforting. I was sitting on my bed, trying to decide whether to sleep or just wait it out, when I heard the knock. It wasn't loud, just a soft tap on my front door. Not even a knock, really, more like fingertips brushing wood. I froze. Who would knock like that? I waited, not moving, listening. The air in my apartment felt suddenly colder. Another knock, slightly louder this time. I got up and tiptoed to the door, pressing my eye to the peephole, but it was pitch black outside. No hallway light, no silhouette, nothing, just blackness. "Who is it?" I asked. Silence. I felt a chill creep up my spine. I waited a moment longer, then turned away from the door. That's when I heard it again, but not at the front door. It was coming from the window. I turned slowly. My bedroom window faced the alley between our building and the next. It was 2 stories up, no balcony, no fire escape. Just a small ledge about 6 inches wide. But the sound was unmistakable, knuckles or something tapping lightly against the glass. 3 soft taps. I walked over slowly, candle in hand. I couldn't see anything beyond the reflection of the candlelight. Then I carefully pulled back the curtain. Nothing. I leaned closer. Still nothing. I stood there a moment longer before letting the curtain fall shut again. Must have been the wind. Or maybe the building was settling and I imagined it. But when I turned around, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was a smudge on the glass, a single handprint, too high up to have come from inside. I backed away from the window and blew out the candle instinctively, plunging the room into darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I slid into the corner of the room and sat on the floor trying to make sense of it. My brain grasped at rationality, maybe some kid with a ladder playing a prank. Maybe I touched the window earlier and forgot. But the air didn't feel like it wanted rational explanations. I stayed there in the dark for what must have been an hour, listening. Nothing but the distant hum of insects. And then the front door handle rattled. Not gently. This time it jerked violently as if someone tried to open it from the outside. I stood up, suddenly filled with a strange combination of adrenaline and fear. I didn't have a weapon, not really, but I grabbed the heavy candlestick and crept toward the door. The handle jiggled again, harder this time. I pressed my eye to the peephole once more. Still pitch black. I reached to the left where the deadbolt was and slid it silently into place, just in case it wasn't already. The jiggling stopped. Then the knock came again. Soft taps, 3 of them, exactly like before. I backed away from the door and into the living room, not sure what to do. No phone, no power, no idea what time it was now. The night stretched on, and I couldn't bring myself to sleep. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps upstairs. That was odd, because the tenants above me had left for vacation 2 days earlier. I knew this because I spoke to them while they were loading their car. But someone was walking around. At first it was soft, like someone pacing, then more deliberate, heavier, then silence, and then the sound of furniture being dragged. It scraped across the floor for a few seconds, then again from another corner of the ceiling. I sat frozen on my couch, staring up at the ceiling, half expecting something to break through. There was a thump, another, directly above me. I couldn't take it anymore. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, intending to knock on someone else's door or just get out of the building altogether. But the hallway was darker than it should have been. I looked down the corridor and my blood ran cold. All the apartment doors were open, every single one, including units where no one lived. I walked slowly past 2A, door wide open, inside pitch black. 2B, the old lady who barely left her place, also wide open. My breathing quickened. I picked up my pace. Then I stopped in front of the stairwell. There was a man standing on the landing, backlit faintly by the red emergency exit sign. I could barely make out details. He stood perfectly still, facing away from me, his head tilted slightly to one side. "Hello?" I asked. He didn't move. I took a step back, and then he took a step down. I turned and ran, bolting down the hallway toward the back exit. I flew down the stairs, skipping steps, trying to keep my footing in the dark. I reached the bottom floor, slammed the door open, and burst out into the back lot. But the lot was empty and silent. No streetlights, no glow from other buildings. It was like the blackout had swallowed everything. I looked up. My building was completely dark. But in one window, my bedroom, I saw something move. A silhouette, standing there, watching me. I ran. I didn't stop running until I was 4 blocks away, where the lights from a 24-hour gas station flickered in the distance. It was the only place in the area that seemed to have backup power. I stumbled inside, breathless, and the cashier gave me a weird look. "Dude, are you okay?" I nodded quickly, trying to explain, but the words caught in my throat. I bought a cheap phone charger and sat by the outlet next to the drink machine. It was almost an hour before my phone had enough charge to call the police. When they arrived at the apartment building, the power was still out. They did a walkthrough but found no one suspicious. No sign of forced entry. No handprint on the window. Nothing. My upstairs neighbors? Still gone. The unit was locked. No sign of movement inside. They offered to let me stay somewhere for the night, but I refused. I stayed with a friend across town instead. When I returned 2 days later, everything was exactly as I left it, except for one thing. On the inside of my bedroom window, drawn in the condensation from the humidity, was a perfect handprint, a match for the one I saw outside, but this one was inside. I moved out the next week. Story the end. It was late June, and the heat had been unbearable for days in the small town of Harper's Ridge. The air was thick, unmoving, and the sky had carried the weight of a coming storm since morning. Nora Bell, a 34-year-old nurse working nights at the county hospital, had just gotten home around 6:45 p.m., peeling off her scrubs and sinking into her couch. Her small one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a duplex was barely ventilated. No AC, just a box fan humming uselessly in the corner. She turned on the ceiling fan and stripped to a tank top and shorts, hoping the weather would shift soon. She hadn't eaten all day and was contemplating ordering food when her phone buzzed. An emergency alert from the county. Severe storms with high winds and potential for outages. She sighed, muted the alert, and walked to the kitchen. As she pulled open the fridge, the lights flickered once, twice. Then everything went black. The hum of electricity stopped altogether. No lights, no fan, just the thick silence of a sudden power outage. Her heart sunk. Blackouts weren't unusual in Harper's Ridge, especially during storms, but something about this one felt wrong. She went to the window, expecting flashes of lightning, some hint of a brewing storm, but the sky was dull and gray, not violent. No rain yet, no wind. Nora grabbed her phone. The battery was at 63%. She opened a flashlight app and swept the beam around the apartment. Everything looked normal, but the oppressive silence made her skin prickle. She called the power company. A pre-recorded message said they were aware of the issue and would restore power as soon as possible. She tossed her phone onto the couch and went to find her emergency lantern. She remembered putting it in the hall closet after the last outage. When she opened the closet door, she heard it, an unmistakable sound behind her, like a foot dragging across the carpet. She turned sharply, light pointed down the hallway, but saw nothing. The beam caught on framed photos and the edge of her bedroom door, half open. She waited. No sound followed. She chalked it up to tired nerves, found the lantern, and flicked it on. Its warm glow spread out across the hallway, chasing back the shadows. Just then, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from her downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Levinson. "Is your power out too? Thought I heard someone upstairs walking just now. Everything okay?" Nora replied. "Yeah, out here too. I'm fine. Just looking for lanterns. Probably just me, you heard." But the truth was, she hadn't been walking until now. She sat down, suddenly aware of how loud the silence was. No hum from appliances, no street noise, no wind. It was too quiet, even for a blackout. Something about the stillness outside made her stomach turn. She opened the window to try and hear anything. Voices, footsteps, wind, even birds. Nothing. Then she noticed the houses across the street were dark too. No porch lights, no flickering of TVs in living rooms. The whole street was dead. Every window looked hollow and black. She considered going down to check on Mrs. Levinson, but before she could decide, she heard it again. A dragging noise, longer this time, definitely inside her apartment. Her heart jumped into her throat. The sound came from her bedroom. Slowly, holding the lantern in one hand and a heavy flashlight in the other, she crept down the hall. Her bedroom door creaked open as she approached, revealing only the edge of her bed and her dresser. The lantern beam landed on the bed. Nothing there. The floor, clear. But then something in her closet knocked once. Not a rustle, not a creak, a deliberate knock. She backed away, breathing shallow. She locked eyes with the closet door. She hadn't opened that in weeks. It was crammed full of storage bins and unused bedding. There was no way anything could be moving in there unless it had already been inside. Another knock. Slower. Heavier. She dropped the lantern in panic, the light rolling across the floor and casting giant swinging shadows across the walls. She ran to the front door, yanked it open, and sprinted down the stairs to Mrs. Levinson's door. She banged on it until the old woman opened it in her robe, her face pale in the lantern glow. "You okay?" Mrs. Levinson asked. "I heard something in my closet," Nora said. "It's not normal." Mrs. Levinson's expression changed. "Come in. Hurry." Nora stepped inside. The apartment smelled like lavender and wood polish, a strange comfort. Mrs. Levinson shut the door and locked it. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. "This house, it's old, older than most on this street. My husband and I bought it in the 70s. The upstairs unit used to be part of the original house, before it was converted." Nora was catching her breath. "What are you saying?" "I don't want to scare you," she said, voice low. "But back in the 40s, a man named Henry Muncie lived here. Alone. He wasn't right in the head. The story goes that he went missing one night during a blackout just like this. Some people said he'd been hearing things in the walls. Others said he'd been doing things to stray animals, but nobody ever found him." Nora shook her head. "You're saying this place is haunted?" "I'm saying," the old woman looked her square in the eye, "blackouts aren't just about the power. Sometimes it's like the house remembers, or something inside it does." Nora didn't sleep that night. She stayed downstairs with Mrs. Levinson. Around midnight, they both heard footsteps upstairs, walking the exact path from the bedroom to the living room, then to the closet, then silence again. At sunrise, the power returned. Lights flicked back on, fans spun, and the TV in the living room crackled to life. Nora crept back upstairs to check her place. Everything was as she left it, except for one thing. The bedroom closet door was wide open. Inside, the bins were pulled out and stacked oddly, almost like a person had crawled out from behind them. A faint, greasy handprint marked the inside of the closet wall. No signs of forced entry, no animals, nothing. Just the smell of damp wood and old dust. She called the police. They came, searched the apartment, found nothing. No signs of a break-in, no footprints, no fingerprints besides her own. They filed a report and told her to stay alert. That night, just as the sun set, the power went out again. She was ready this time. She stayed by the door, phone charged, emergency lights set up. Hours passed. The apartment was silent again, too silent. At 2:03 a.m., her phone buzzed. A message. No name, no number. Just the words, "Still here, still watching." She dropped the phone, her breath caught. Then came the knock, once, heavy, on the inside of her bedroom closet again. She ran out of the apartment, down the street in bare feet, screaming. She moved the next day. Weeks passed. She tried to forget. She stayed with friends, day, then moved in with her sister in another town. But she kept having dreams of being trapped in her closet, something outside waiting, scratching, of the lights going out, of someone breathing just behind her. 3 months later, she saw a listing for her old apartment again. Online photos showed the same rooms, freshly painted. In the last photo, a wide shot of the bedroom, something stood in the closet, barely visible, just behind the edge of the door. Tall, gaunt, watching. The listing was removed 2 days later. She tried to warn people, posted on forums, told the local paper. Nobody believed her. They thought it was trauma, paranoia. Until a new tenant moved in. Young guy, maybe 25. He lasted 2 weeks. Disappeared during a sudden blackout. No one has rented the place since. Story the end. It was an ordinary summer night when the blackout hit our small town. I still remember the exact day, July 14th, 2017, because it was the night of the big fireworks festival down by the river. My friends and I were supposed to meet at my place before heading out, but the power outage changed everything. The evening started like any other. I was home alone, finishing some homework while my parents were out running errands. The old house creaked quietly in the humid air, the only light coming from the desk lamp and the muted TV in the living room. I'd just closed my laptop when the lights flickered once, twice, then went completely dark. The hum of the refrigerator died, and the clock on the microwave blinked off. I instinctively reached for my phone, but the screen stayed blank. No signal. No Wi-Fi. The silence of the house was suddenly overwhelming. I lit a candle on the kitchen counter and tried to calm myself. Maybe it was a neighborhood outage. I grabbed my keys and wallet, intending to check with a neighbor, but as soon as I stepped outside, the full extent of the blackout hit me. No streetlights, no car headlights, no signs of life. The entire town was swallowed by darkness. I called my best friend Mike, hoping he might have answers or at least a working phone, but all I got was voicemail. I texted him and the others, but the messages never sent. That's when the unease set in. I decided to walk over to Mike's house. His place was only a block away, and I figured if anyone had power, it would be him. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and stepped carefully down the porch steps. Outside, the air was thick and heavy, charged with a strange kind of energy. The usual summer chorus of cicadas was gone. Even the crickets were silent. It was the kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums and makes you hold your breath. Halfway to Mike's, I noticed something odd. A faint, flickering glow was coming from the park at the center of town. It looked like a fire, but the light was unnatural, blue and green flames dancing above the treetops. My curiosity piqued. I headed toward the park, flashlight beam cutting through the inky blackness. As I got closer, I saw people gathered near the fire. Their faces were pale in the eerie light, eyes wide and staring. "Hey!" I called out, but no one answered. Not a single word. They just stood, frozen in place. Suddenly, I noticed the ground beneath them was blackened and cracked as if scorched by intense heat, but the fire didn't feel warm. In fact, the temperature seemed to drop sharply the closer I got. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. I took a step back, and then I heard it. A low hum vibrating through the air. It started faint, but quickly grew louder. A metallic ringing that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. Panic set in. I turned to run, but the path behind me was blocked by thick, shadowy figures that hadn't been there moments ago. They didn't move, but their presence was suffocating. I fumbled with my flashlight, trying to turn it on full power, but it dimmed and died. Suddenly, the humming stopped. The figures vanished. The crowd in the park blinked as if waking from a trance and scattered, screaming and running in all directions. I sprinted home, heart hammering, mind racing. When I got back, I found my parents waiting on the porch, faces pale but unharmed. The power had just returned. The next day, the news was full of reports about a strange electromagnetic event that had caused widespread outages across several states. Scientists were baffled by its origin. I never told anyone about the park or the strange crowd. People would think I was crazy, but I know what I saw, and I still hear that low humming sometimes when the lights go out. Story, the end. The night the blackout hit was just like any other. It was a late September evening, cool but not cold, with a hint of early fall in the air. I was living alone in a small, older apartment building in the city, one of those brick walk-ups with creaky floors and a history of tenants who mostly kept to themselves. I had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to a quiet night, maybe some TV and a hot shower before bed. The power went out around 9:15 p.m. It was sudden. The whole neighborhood plunged into darkness. No flicker, no warning. The hum of the refrigerator stopped, the glow of the streetlights vanished, and the usual city noises seemed to muffle, swallowed by the silence of the blackout. I remember staring out my window at the street, now an ink-black void, trying to spot the distant flicker of a flashlight or a candle in someone else's window. I grabbed my phone, but the screen was dead. No signal, no battery life. Somehow I hadn't charged it that day. Typical. I fumbled around my apartment for a flashlight, finally finding one in a kitchen drawer. The beam was weak, flickering, but better than nothing. The old building creaked a little as it settled in the night. Sounds I had heard a million times before, but now felt different, sharper, almost menacing. I decided to make my way to the hallway to see if the whole building was dark. I stepped out into the corridor. The emergency lights were supposed to come on during outages, but the hallway was pitch black. I heard the faint rustling of movement further down the hall. Not a sound I'd heard before, and it made me freeze. I called out, "Hello?" But no reply came, only the soft scrape of what sounded like something sliding across the floor. It wasn't loud, but in the dead silence of the blackout, it was deafening. I fumbled along the wall until I found the stairwell door and opened it slowly. The stairwell was plunged into shadow. I took a deep breath and turned on my flashlight, sweeping it down the steps. Nothing. No one. Just darkness. I was about to go back into my apartment when I heard a faint whisper, barely audible, coming from below. It was too soft to make out words, but the tone was urgent. I peered down the steps, heart pounding. The building was old, built in the 1920s, with a narrow, steep staircase that creaked underfoot. I debated going down, but the sound had stopped. Maybe it was my imagination. I locked the stairwell door behind me and returned to my apartment. I checked my windows. No lights on in any of the other units. It felt as if the whole building had gone silent, frozen in place. I tried calling the electric company on my landline phone. Nothing. No dial tone. With no TV, no internet, and no light, I sat on my couch, the flashlight beam barely reaching the far corner of the room. The silence was oppressive. I started to hear the usual noises of the building more clearly. The pipes groaning, the walls settling, but there was an added layer of something else. A low, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it was just a loose pipe or something outside, but the tapping had a cadence, a pattern that seemed deliberate. I got up and moved toward the window to see if the tapping was coming from outside. The street was completely dark. I couldn't see a thing. As I turned away from the window, the tapping stopped abruptly. I decided I needed to check the basement, maybe the building's generator or some emergency system. The basement door was at the bottom of the stairwell. I grabbed my flashlight and the small crowbar I kept in the kitchen drawer, a habit I'd picked up from living alone, and headed to the stairwell again. The hallway was unnervingly silent. No sound from neighbors, no hum of electronics, no cars driving by. It felt as if the entire block was frozen in darkness and stillness. I descended the stairs cautiously. The flashlight beam danced over the peeling paint and cracked concrete walls. As I reached the bottom floor, I noticed the basement door was slightly ajar. It was supposed to be locked. I pushed it open carefully, feeling a chill wash over me as the cool, damp air of the basement hit my face. The smell was stale, mildew and rust. The beam of the flashlight landed on rows of old water heaters and storage boxes. I stepped inside and the door creaked shut behind me. I tried to open it, but it was stuck fast. I hit it with the crowbar a few times. No luck. Panic crept in. I swung the flashlight around, scanning the basement. That's when I saw it, a dark shape in the far corner, just beyond the reach of the flashlight. At first, I thought it was a coat rack or some piled-up junk, but then the shape moved, a slow, deliberate motion. I froze. The shape seemed to be crouched down, almost blending into the shadows. But as it moved, I caught a glimpse of pale skin, matted hair, and eyes reflecting the flashlight beam like wet stones. I whispered, "Who's there?" No response. Then the tapping started again, this time from inside the basement, echoing against the concrete walls. The tapping wasn't random anymore. It was a message. 3 sharp taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 1 tap. It was like Morse code. I had no idea what it meant. My breath was shallow, my heart pounding so loud I was sure the figure could hear it. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and went out. I was plunged into total darkness. I slammed the flashlight on, but it wouldn't light. Then a cold hand grabbed my wrist. I screamed and yanked my arm free, stumbling backward into a stack of crates that toppled with a crash. I scrambled toward the door, banging on it with the crowbar. After what felt like an eternity, the door gave way, and I burst into the stairwell, gasping for air. I slammed the door behind me and locked it. I ran back up the stairs, my heart racing, the tapping echoing behind me, fading into the silence of the blackout. When I reached my apartment, I locked every door and window and sat down, trembling. The power came back on around 2 a.m., restoring the hum and glow of the city. I tried to tell the building manager the next day, but he said the basement had been empty for months. No storage, no maintenance, no known tenants. No one believed me. I never went into the basement again. Sometimes on stormy nights when the power flickers, I still hear that tapping. Story, the end. The blackout started just after sunset, sudden and complete. It wasn't one of those rolling outages announced by the city or the power company. No warning, no flicker, no hum of generators kicking in. The entire neighborhood went dark. Homes, streetlights, traffic signals, all swallowed by a thick, unnatural silence that seemed to stretch for miles in every direction. Jason was at home, sitting on his couch with a book, when the lights died. He'd been halfway through a thriller novel, but the darkness swallowed the room instantly, turning everything into a vague outline in the deepening dusk. His phone buzzed, but he barely noticed. The signal was weak, and with the sudden outage, he figured the cell towers might be struggling too. After fumbling for a flashlight in the kitchen drawer, he flicked it on and scanned the living room. The beam caught dust motes dancing in the air, the edges of furniture, and the familiar clutter of a life lived solo. Empty coffee mugs, an old guitar resting against the wall, stacks of magazines. Outside, he could hear the faint sound of wind rustling through the trees, but no cars, no voices, nothing that usually filled the suburban street at night. At first, Jason tried to convince himself it was just a temporary power cut, something the city would fix by morning. But as hours ticked by, the ominous reality of the blackout began to sink in. He wasn't alone, though. The whole city had gone dark. His neighbor's porch light was out, and the occasional flicker of a candle through a window was one of the few signs of life in the blackness. He checked his phone again, still no service. The power outage was widespread, and the entire grid seemed to have collapsed. Jason decided to stay put. Going outside in complete darkness didn't feel safe. There were strange things happening in the city lately. Burglaries, vandalisms, a few reports of missing persons. The news on TV had been increasingly grim, but without power or signal, he was cut off from updates. He lit a few candles he found in a kitchen cabinet, settling into an uneasy vigil on the couch. The silence was oppressive, filled with an intangible weight. It was as if the dark was alive, pressing down, waiting. Around midnight, Jason heard the first noises. At first, it was subtle. The creak of a floorboard somewhere in the apartment, the faint scrape of something against the wall, distant enough to be dismissed as settling sounds or the wind. But soon, the sounds grew clearer, more distinct. Footsteps, soft, deliberate footsteps pacing just outside his front door. Jason's heart hammered as he grabbed a baseball bat from under the bed, the only weapon he had. He crept toward the door, flashlight trembling in his hand. He pressed his ear against the cold wood. The footsteps stopped. Then a soft, slow scratching noise began, like fingernails dragging over wood. Jason's breath hitched. "Who's there?" His voice cracked as he whispered into the void. No answer. He backed away, the bat raised. The scratching stopped abruptly. Suddenly, a sharp, almost inhuman whisper slithered through the doorframe. "Let me in." Jason's mind screamed for reason. It's a prank, a burglar, someone messing around, but the tone of the voice chilled him to the bone. It wasn't quite human, too cold, too hollow. He slammed the door shut, locked it, and backed away. The footsteps vanished. He spent the next hour sitting by the window, watching the street. The moon cast a weak glow through the clouds, enough to silhouette the shapes of trees and parked cars, but not enough to see clearly. Then he noticed movement across the street. A figure, barely visible, stood just outside his neighbor's house, frozen in place under a streetlight that wasn't working, swallowed in the dark. Jason squinted, heart skipping. The figure didn't move for several minutes, then slowly raised an arm, pointing directly at Jason's window. Jason pulled back, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable. Minutes later, the figure vanished into the darkness. His phone buzzed once more, the screen flashing weakly with a message from an unknown number. "You shouldn't be alone." Jason froze. Who could possibly know he was alone? Was this someone messing with him, or something else? Trying to shake the feeling, he texted back, fingers trembling. "Who is this?" No reply. Suddenly, his phone died. Battery drained instantly. He cursed under his breath, realizing the blackout must be affecting everything electronic. Desperate to distract himself, Jason walked to the kitchen to make some coffee on his gas stove. The small flame flickered in the dark kitchen, casting long shadows. As he poured the hot water, a sudden cold draft swept through the room, despite all windows and doors being closed tight. He turned sharply, flashlight beam slicing the darkness. Nothing. He shrugged off the unease and poured the coffee into a mug. Back in the living room, the flashlight flickered once, then died. Jason cursed again, trying to tap the batteries, but the torch stayed dark. He was plunged into pitch black. He heard it again, the soft footsteps, this time inside the apartment. They circled the room slowly, deliberate and unnervingly quiet. Jason held his breath, gripping the baseball bat. A low whisper seeped into the silence from the far corner of the room. "Don't be afraid." The voice was distant, distorted, almost like it came from underwater. Jason swung the bat blindly toward the sound. It hit nothing but air. Suddenly, the temperature dropped drastically. His breath came out in visible puffs. Something moved just beyond the edge of his flashlight's reach. a dark shape slipping into the shadows. Jason backed against the wall, heart pounding, mind racing. His rational brain screamed this was impossible. There was no one here. But every instinct told him he was not alone. He felt cold fingers brush his arm, icy and unreal. He screamed and swung the bat again, this time knocking over a chair. The crash seemed to anger the presence. The whisper turned into a chilling laugh, hollow and cruel. Jason bolted for the door, fumbling in the dark for the handle. It was stuck. Panic rising, he slammed his shoulder against it. After several tries, the door gave way. He burst into the hallway, which was just as dark and silent as his apartment. The stairwell was pitch black, no emergency lights, no glow from anywhere. He stumbled down the stairs, the bat still raised, eyes straining to see. On the landing, a figure blocked the doorway, standing completely still. Jason screamed, swinging the bat, but the figure vanished. He tumbled down the stairs to the lobby, fumbling for the exit. The front door was locked electronically, of course, no power. He banged on it, shouting for help. From the other side came a raspy voice. No one is coming. Jason's heart sank. Trapped, alone, and hunted by something unseen. He turned, backing into the dark hallway. The whispers multiplied, surrounding him, filling his ears with 1,000 voices, all saying the same thing. Let us in. He ran back into the apartment, locking the door behind him. The candles were all blown out. He fumbled for matches. Striking one, the small flame flickered to life, revealing claw marks etched deep into the wooden door. Jason sank to the floor, exhausted, tears streaming down his face. Outside, the wind howled, and the darkness waited. Several hours passed. Then, just before dawn, the power flickered back on. Lights flooded the apartment, chasing away the shadows. Jason called 911 to report the incident, but the operator told him no unusual activity had been reported in his building. His neighbors had been safe, their doors locked, no signs of forced entry anywhere. Jason never slept in that apartment again. He moved out the next day, leaving all his belongings behind. Some nights he still hears the whispers in his dreams. The power outage wasn't a coincidence. It was a door, and something came through. Story the end. The summer had been unusually hot that year. The kind of heat that made the nights heavy and sticky, making it almost impossible to sleep without a fan or air conditioning. I had just moved into a small apartment on the third floor of an aging building in a mid-sized city. The place wasn't much, but it was affordable, close to work, and gave me some independence after years of living with my parents. For the first couple of weeks, everything seemed fine. Then came the flickering. At first, it was just minor dips in power. The lights would dim for a second or two, the refrigerator would pause with a quiet click, and then everything would resume as normal. I didn't think much of it, figuring the city's electrical grid was old and overloaded. But then the blackouts started. It began one Sunday afternoon. I was sitting on the couch watching TV when suddenly the screen went black. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The ceiling fan ceased spinning. The apartment was plunged into darkness. I instinctively reached for my phone only to realize there was no signal, no Wi-Fi, no service at all. I moved to the window and saw that the entire block was dark. The street lamps weren't on, and all the other buildings looked lifeless. I grabbed a flashlight from a kitchen drawer and stepped outside. Downstairs in the lobby, a couple of neighbors were gathered, faces illuminated by their phones. Flashlights. Some were trying to call someone, but no one was getting through. We shared stories of how the power had flickered on and off in the days prior, but no one had ever experienced a full blackout like this. One man, probably in his late 60s, said he had lived in the building for decades and had never seen anything like it. The manager couldn't be reached. No emergency announcements, no sirens, no fire trucks, no police cars in sight. As evening fell, the temperature inside the apartment started to rise rapidly. Without the fan or the AC, the heat felt suffocating. I closed the windows to keep the bugs out, but the still air made the room feel like an oven. I lit some candles, but the shadows they cast made the apartment feel eerie and unfamiliar. By nightfall, a strange feeling settled over the building. The usual noises of the city had vanished. No distant honks, no dogs barking, no people walking or talking on the streets. Just silence, the kind that feels unnatural. I tried to sleep but couldn't. The darkness felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I heard footsteps outside my door, not the usual creaks from an old building, but deliberate, slow, measured steps pacing back and forth in the hallway. I peered through the peephole, but the corridor was empty and dark. The next morning, the blackout was still total. My phone still had no signal. The elevator wasn't working, so I took the stairs down to the street to see if I could get some information. The city felt abandoned. Cars were parked with their engines cold. Shops were closed, lights off. Occasionally, I would see people in the distance, walking with a strange urgency, but keeping to themselves. I tried to ask a few if they knew what was going on, but most just shook their heads or avoided eye contact. Back in the building, strange things began to happen. Doors that I was sure I had locked were found open. Objects shifted places overnight. The sound of low whispering sometimes came from empty rooms down the hall, but when I opened doors, there was no one there. One evening, I heard banging on the pipes in the walls, as if someone was trying to communicate through Morse code or some code I didn't understand. When I pressed my ear against the wall, the noise stopped abruptly. Neighbors began to disappear. At first, I thought they had left to find help or shelter elsewhere, but no one was answering their doors anymore. No one was in the hallways or stairwells. It was like they had evaporated into thin air. I wasn't sure how long the blackout had lasted. 2 days? 3? The air inside was getting harder to breathe, and the heat was unbearable. I found an old transistor radio in the trash room and tried to tune it to any station, but all I got was static, punctuated by strange, faint signals. At times, the static would clear just enough to hear faint, broken whispers, snatches of voices speaking in languages I couldn't understand. One night, I woke up to the sound of the front door creaking open. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the living room, but no one was there. Then I saw footprints on the floor, bare footprints leading from the door to the window. I checked outside, but there was no sign of anyone. The footprints seemed wet, like they had been made in water, but there was no water anywhere inside. The most unsettling part was the eyes. I began seeing eyes watching me through the windows. Not human eyes. Too large, too reflective, glowing faintly in the dark. I could never make out a face or figure, just those eyes, unblinking and silent. Sometimes I caught glimpses of shadows moving just outside the corner of my vision, but when I looked directly, there was nothing. Sleep became impossible. I started talking to myself just to keep sane. Every creak, every breath of wind made me jump. Then came the knocking. Soft at first, like a gentle tap-tap on the door or window, then growing louder, more insistent, as if something was trying to get in. But there were no knocks from outside. The sound seemed to come from inside the walls, echoing through the apartment. I tried to call the police, emergency services, anyone, but no connection. One evening, I saw my reflection in the dark window, and for a split second, the face staring back was not mine. It was distorted, pale, with sunken eyes and a twisted mouth. I blinked, and it was gone. Desperation set in. I started packing essentials, preparing to leave, but when I opened the door, the hallway stretched endlessly. The building felt like it had changed. Walls shifted, doors that once led to stairwells now opened into darkness. I tried to find my way down, but the familiar stairwell was gone, replaced by a narrow corridor with flickering shadows that whispered my name. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Days blended into each other. My food ran out. The heat became unbearable. The silence was deafening. The knocking never stopped. One night, a voice came through the wall, a whisper that called my name in a child's voice. I shouted back, but the voice only repeated, "Come out, we're waiting." I gathered all my courage and stepped into the hallway. The building was no longer a building. It was a maze of darkness and echoing footsteps, of whispers and unseen eyes. The walls pulsed with a coldness that seeped into my bones. I walked forward, following the voice, until I reached a door that wasn't there before. I opened it and stepped into blinding white light. I woke up in a hospital room, hooked to machines. The blackout had lasted 6 days. Apparently, a transformer exploded downtown, causing a massive power outage. I was found collapsed in my apartment by emergency responders, dehydrated and delirious. But the thing is, I don't remember collapsing. I don't remember how I got help. And sometimes, when the lights flicker or when I'm alone in a dark room, I still hear the knocking. I still see those eyes watching me from the shadows. Sometimes when the power goes out even briefly, I swear I'm not alone in the dark. Story the end. The night the blackout started, I was sitting in my apartment reading a book. It was early June, but the heat had been relentless all day. The air conditioner had been rattling loudly, struggling to keep the room even remotely cool. I lived alone on the fifth floor of an older apartment building in a mid-sized city. Nothing fancy, but it was home. The windows barely kept out the noise of the street below, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbors through the night. Sometimes I liked it, sometimes it made me feel exposed. That evening, as dusk began to settle, the lights flickered once, twice, then died. The hum of the AC stopped abruptly, and an eerie silence replaced the usual buzz of electronics. I instinctively reached for my phone, but it was dead. No signal, no data. The digital clock on my microwave was blank. The streetlights outside had gone dark. The city was swallowed by darkness. I sat there in the blackness for a while, unsure what to do. It was like the whole world had stopped. No cars passed below, no voices drifted up from the street. The only sound was my own breathing. I lit a candle and felt a strange chill crawl over my skin despite the heat. I tried calling the power company, but of course, no luck. Around me, the apartment building was unusually quiet. No elevator noises, no muffled conversations, no footsteps in the hallways. I live in a densely populated area. Usually there's always some movement, even at night. But now it was like everyone had vanished. I decided to check the hallway. I crept out, careful not to drop the candle. The corridor was pitch black except for the weak flame, and the air smelled stale, like the building had been shut up tight for days. Doors that should have been shut were cracked open or wide. I saw nothing, but I felt eyes watching me. Back in my apartment, I tried to make sense of it. The power outage was widespread, I guessed. But how widespread? I didn't know anyone nearby. I had no way to contact them. The fear began to creep in. Later that night, I heard a knocking. At first, soft, like a timid tap, tap, tap on my front door. My heart raced. I wasn't expecting anyone. I crept to the peephole and looked out, but the hallway was empty. The knocking stopped. I laughed nervously, thinking maybe it was just the building settling or a prank from a neighbor. I returned to my chair, but was barely able to concentrate on my book. The air grew thick with unease. Then I heard it again. Knocking, but this time from the window. I turned toward it, the candlelight trembling in my hand. The window was dark, but I saw a shape, an outline of a person standing just beyond the glass. No movement, just watching. I blinked. The figure was gone. I locked the door and closed the blinds, but the feeling lingered, like something was outside waiting. Sleep was impossible. Every creak, every distant noise was magnified. My imagination raced. At one point, I heard whispering. Faint, unintelligible voices like murmurs from another room. But my apartment was empty except for me. In the early hours, the knocking came again. This time louder, more frantic. I gathered my courage and flung open the door. No one was there. On the floor, wet footprints led away, disappearing into the hallway. I was not alone. Over the next few days, the blackouts stretched on. The city was paralyzed. No one could leave their homes. No stores or services were open. I ran out of food quickly, and the heat became unbearable. Neighbors who once seemed friendly were now withdrawn, suspicious. Rumors spread about break-ins and strange sightings. People vanished without explanation. One night, I heard screams coming from the apartment below. I rushed down the stairs, but when I reached the door, it was locked tight. No answer to my knocks. The screams stopped abruptly. The next day, the apartment was empty. No signs of struggle, no belongings left behind. The worst part was the watching. At night, shadows moved just beyond the edges of my vision. Figures stood silently in the hallways, their faces hidden in darkness. When I tried to approach, they vanished. I started to question my own mind. One evening, I saw a reflection in the window. My own face, but twisted, pale, with dark, hollow eyes staring back at me. I slammed the blinds shut and retreated into the dark. Eventually, after nearly a week, power was restored. But nothing felt normal. People who had disappeared never returned. Neighbors moved away. The building was half empty. I never found out what caused the blackout or what those things were. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the knocking, and sometimes when the lights flicker, I catch those hollow eyes watching me from the shadows. Story the end. The night the blackout happened, I was alone in my apartment on the 7th floor of an old building in Queens, New York. It was late July, the kind of sticky summer night where the air feels thick and the windows offer no relief, even when open. The city had been simmering all day under a relentless heat wave, and the power outage felt like the final straw. I'd just gotten home from work, exhausted and drenched in sweat, craving nothing but a cold shower and the hum of the air conditioner. Instead, as I stepped inside, the silence was immediate and suffocating. The lights were out, the elevator dead, and the buzzing hum of the city seemed to have dimmed with the power cut. My phone's screen glowed faintly, but no Wi-Fi and patchy cell service made it useless for contacting anyone. It wasn't just my building. Looking out my window, I saw that the neighboring blocks were black too. No streetlights, no signs of life except for a few people wandering with flashlights or candles. The blackout was widespread. I grabbed a flashlight from my kitchen drawer and lit a couple of candles. I paced the apartment, the heat pressing down on me, trying to keep my nerves steady. I kept thinking about the news I'd read earlier that day. The power grid was fragile due to the heat wave, and outages were a growing concern. Around 11 p.m., I heard something unusual. Soft, deliberate tapping noises coming from the hallway outside my door. I froze, listening carefully. The old building always creaked and groaned, but this was different. Taps, 3 short ones. Then a pause, then 3 more. The rhythm was almost like Morse code. I wanted to dismiss it as someone else's nervous pacing, but the pattern was deliberate. My heart pounded as I moved cautiously to the door, gripping a heavy metal flashlight. I peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the air felt charged, like something was watching me. I bolted back into the apartment and locked the deadbolt, even though it was already locked. I sat back against the door, trying to calm down, but my skin prickled. The tapping started again, softer this time, now on the window at the far end of my living room. I switched off all the candles except one and crept toward the window. Shining my flashlight onto the fire escape below, I saw a dark figure standing still, staring up at my apartment. I couldn't make out any features in the darkness, but it was definitely a person. A man, maybe. His posture was unnerving, rigid, almost unnatural. I slammed the curtains shut and dialed 911. The operator sounded sympathetic, but said there was little they could do immediately because the blackout affected their response capabilities. Stay inside, lock your doors, and wait for the power to come back, she advised. I spent the rest of the night on edge, flashlight in one hand, a kitchen knife in the other. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow seemed alive. I barely slept. When the power finally flickered back on around 5 a.m., relief flooded me. The city slowly came back to life. The streetlights blinked on, the air conditioner hummed to life, and I felt normal again. I opened the curtains and looked down at the fire escape. The muddy footprints were there, clear, wet, fresh. I didn't own plants or anything that could have tracked mud, and it hadn't rained. Someone had been on my fire escape, watching me all night. I called the police to report the intrusion, but they said without a witness or a direct break-in, they could only take a report. I installed a security camera the next day, covering my door and window. It had night vision and motion detection. I started carrying pepper spray and double-checking every lock before bed. 2 weeks later, the blackout struck again. This time it was even worse. A citywide heat wave had caused rolling blackouts across multiple boroughs, and the power went out just after 10 p.m. I settled into my apartment for the night, ready this time. I had a battery-operated fan, extra water, and my camera recording everything. Around midnight, the same tapping began, this time louder and closer. 3 taps on my front door, pause, then 3 more. I grabbed the flashlight and called out, "Who's there?" No answer. The tapping repeated on the window, soft and steady. I checked my phone. No signal again. The panic rose in my chest. Suddenly the camera notified me of him by the front door. I crept to the peephole. Outside stood the same figure from before, his face hidden by shadows. He was watching me. I didn't recognize him. He raised a hand slowly and waved, then disappeared down the hall. The next day, I reviewed the footage. Clear as day, a tall man, thin, hooded, moved silently toward my door, knocked 6 times, then waved and left. I showed it to the police again. They still couldn't identify him. I began sleeping with a baseball bat, always. Neighbors shared similar stories. Footsteps, knocking, strange figures lurking in the dark during blackouts. One neighbor told me a chilling tale. Years ago, a man in the building had gone missing during a blackout. No one found him, no explanation. Some said he was never really gone, that he returned during the dark, watching, waiting. I moved out a month later, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. But even now, years later, every time the power flickers or goes out, I remember the tapping, the silent figure, and the long, oppressive nights in that apartment where the darkness was never empty. Story. The end. The city had been simmering under a relentless heat wave for days. Temperatures hovered above 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity hung thick in the air, making every breath feel heavy and damp. It was the kind of oppressive heat that made even the busiest streets slow to a crawl by late afternoon, and by the time evening came, people simply sought refuge wherever they could find shade and a breeze. But this particular evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the air felt charged, almost restless. I was home alone in my small apartment on the 5th floor of a brick building in an older section of town. I had just finished cooking dinner and was settling in to watch the news when the lights suddenly flickered and then went out entirely. At first, I thought it was a brief surge, a problem with my apartment's wiring. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The glowing numbers on the stove's digital clock vanished, and my phone's screen dimmed as it lost its charger's power source. I stood up and looked out the window, seeing that the streetlights and the windows of neighboring buildings were dark as well. The whole block was engulfed in sudden blackout. I stepped onto the balcony to get a better view. The streets were nearly empty, with only a few cars idling aimlessly, their headlights off or blinking erratically. The city's usual night buzz, honking horns, distant music, chatter, was replaced by an eerie silence that seemed almost unnatural. No birds, no rustling leaves, no distant hum of the subway trains. Even the cicadas that usually filled the summer nights were strangely quiet. I retreated back into my apartment and lit a couple of candles I kept for emergencies. Their flickering orange light painted shadows on the walls. I checked my phone. It had some battery left, but no signal. No texts, no calls. I tried to send a message to my roommate who was at her parents' house for the weekend, but it failed to send. I told myself this blackout was temporary, probably caused by the city's overloaded electrical grid struggling under the heat. But as the minutes stretched into hours, the sense of unease grew. Without the steady hum of electricity and the comfort of illumination, the apartment felt suddenly alien. The shadows around the room deepened and stretched like living things. Around 10 p.m., I heard it. A faint tapping at the front door. My heart jumped, but I reminded myself that our building's front doors often stuck and sometimes banged against the frame in the night breeze. I stood up to check, the candle trembling slightly in my hand. I opened the peephole but saw nothing. The hallway was pitch dark except for the faint glow of the emergency exit lights. No one was there. The tapping came again, this time more deliberate. 3 slow knocks. I whispered, "Who's there?" But no answer. The knocking stopped. Feeling unsettled, I double-locked the door and backed away. I sat back down on the couch, trying to focus on the flickering candlelight, but the silence was broken once more, this time by the sound of tapping at the window. It was the bedroom window, facing the alley between our building and the next. I crept over and peered outside. The alley was cloaked in darkness. Not even the emergency exit signs from the adjacent building glowed. I couldn't see a thing. The tapping came again, 3 times. I pressed my face against the glass, heart pounding. Then, suddenly, a pale handprint appeared on the window, smearing upward as if someone had pressed it hard and slid their hand along the glass. I stumbled back, breath catching in my throat. There was no way anyone could have been standing on the narrow ledge outside the window, several stories up. I closed the curtains and sank to the floor, trying to calm my breathing. The candle flickered wildly, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen stayed dead. Suddenly, the knocking at the front door resumed, louder, more urgent. Then the door handle rattled violently, as though someone was trying to force it open. I grabbed the heaviest object nearby, a metal lamp base, and stood ready. The rattling stopped, replaced by a heavy silence. Minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth. I dared not open the door. The footsteps paused. Then came a long, drawn-out sigh, a breath that sounded too human to be anything else. I sank to the floor, clutching the lamp base, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But the sounds continued, footsteps resuming, accompanied now by faint whispering, like someone speaking just out of earshot. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was low and menacing. The night stretched on like this. Sounds in the dark, tapping, knocking, footsteps pacing the empty hallways. I didn't sleep. When dawn finally crept through the window, pale and weak, I opened the door cautiously. The hallway was empty, but every other apartment door on the floor was open. Some ajar, some wide open, though the tenants were supposed to be home. I ventured further down the hall, heart pounding. The doors swung slightly in the early morning breeze, revealing dark, empty rooms. I called the building manager, who was as baffled as I was. She said no one else reported any suspicious activity. Later that day, the power came back on. The city lights flickered to life and normal sounds returned. But inside my apartment, I found a new handprint, this time on the inside of my bedroom window. It was smeared as if someone had tried to wipe it away. I moved out that week. I never told anyone what I saw or heard that night. And sometimes when the power goes out and the world falls silent, I swear I can still hear the tapping. Story the end. The summer of 2003 was brutal in the northeastern United States. That July, an intense heat wave baked cities from New York to Toronto, turning streets into shimmering ribbons of heat. I was living in a small apartment on the fourth floor of a faded brick building in a working-class neighborhood in New York City. Air conditioning was a luxury I couldn't afford, and that summer was one of the hottest I can remember. The nights were barely cooler, and the city seemed to be holding its breath under the relentless sun. It was the evening of July 14th, a Monday. I had just finished a long shift at a local diner where the old ceiling fans did little to ease the stifling air. I was tired, sweaty, and desperate to get home and drink a cold glass of water. When I finally reached my building, I noticed something unusual right away. The entire block was dark. The usual hum of streetlights and apartment windows lit up with TVs or lamps was gone. There was an unsettling silence. No hum from air conditioners, no glow from neon signs on nearby shops, no flicker of any light. The world had gone black. I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably a power outage like many I'd experienced before during heat waves, but something about the silence was heavier, more ominous. I climbed the 4 flights of stairs in the dark, the concrete steps rough under my bare feet. The emergency stairwell light flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the walls. When I reached my apartment door and finally got it open, I was hit by the wall of hot, stagnant air inside. No breeze, no relief. I lit a few candles and placed them around the small living room and kitchen. The flickering flames made the apartment feel cozy for a moment, but that feeling passed quickly. Outside, the street was unnervingly quiet. No cars, no voices, no movement. The blackout had spread through most of the city. Reports later confirmed that a critical transformer had failed, overloaded by the excessive power draw from air conditioners. But none of that comforted me then. I sat on the edge of the couch, trying to cool my face with a damp rag from the kitchen sink. Suddenly, I heard a soft noise, almost imperceptible at first, like a slow, rhythmic tapping. I froze, straining to hear it again. The tapping continued, steady but faint, coming from the bedroom. My heart began to race. I told myself it was probably a loose shutter or a branch brushing against the window outside. The rain from an earlier storm had left the air thick, and I could hear the occasional drip of water falling from the gutter. But the tapping didn't sound like wind or water. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, and slowly walked toward the bedroom. The beam of light sliced through the darkness, landing on the cracked plaster walls, the peeling wallpaper, the bed piled with rumpled sheets. The window was closed. No breeze. Then the tapping stopped. I stood there for a moment, feeling foolish, until I noticed a faint shadow moving near the closet door. I turned the light toward it, but the closet was closed and still. I reached out and slowly opened the door. Inside, the clothes hung neatly as always. No sign of anything unusual. I closed the door quickly and went back to the living room, shaking my head. I sat back down on the couch, and just as I relaxed a bit, the power flickered. The lights in the hallway outside my apartment briefly came on, illuminating the hallway and the stairwell. Then, The lights went off again, plunging me back into darkness. That's when I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway outside my door. They were slow and heavy, deliberate. Not the light, hurried steps of a neighbor rushing by. These were measured, steady. I grabbed my phone, but the screen was dark. No signal, no service. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I held my breath. Then a soft knock. 1, 2, 3. I swallowed hard. I was alone. My roommate was visiting family out of town. No one else lived on my floor except me. "Who's there?" I called out, voice shaky. No answer. I fumbled for my flashlight and shone it toward the door's peephole. Nothing. No shadow. No sign of a person. The knocking continued, slow, rhythmic. Suddenly, the door handle rattled. I stepped back, panic rising. The handle twisted down, then jerked back up. Someone was trying to get in. I moved away from the door, edging toward the bedroom. Then I heard a low, gravelly whisper. So faint I almost didn't catch it. "Open." The voice was not human, not fully. There was something wrong with it, like air leaking from a broken tire, like a slow exhale from a wound. I grabbed a heavy kitchen knife from the counter and gripped it tightly. The door shook, then everything stopped. The footsteps vanished. The knocking ceased. Silence. I sat down on the floor, knife clutched in my hands, and waited. Minutes passed like hours. Then, just as I thought the nightmare was over, the doorbell downstairs rang 3 times in rapid succession. I jumped to my feet. The doorbell was broken. Always had been. I froze. The power came back on suddenly, flooding the apartment with harsh white light. I blinked against it. I glanced at the door. No one was there. I opened it cautiously. The hallway was empty. No one. No footprints. No signs that anyone had even stood there. I locked the door and collapsed onto the couch, shaking. In the days that followed, news reports confirmed that the blackout had lasted for more than 6 hours in my neighborhood. Several other residents reported strange noises and unexplained footsteps in their buildings during the outage. One elderly woman who lived in my building claimed she had seen a shadowy figure standing at her bedroom window during the blackout. Another neighbor told police that his apartment door had been left unlocked when he returned home the next day, despite locking it before the outage. There was no evidence of break-ins, no security footage, no eyewitnesses. Just the dark, the silence, and the feeling that something had been watching. I eventually moved out of that apartment, unable to shake the sense that I was being followed by whatever had come through the blackout. Years later, when the city experienced another power failure, I still get nervous when the lights flicker. I keep a flashlight by my bed and never ignore a knock at the door when the power is out. Because sometimes when the world goes dark, it's not just the electricity that fails. Story the end. The summer of 2019 was brutal. The kind of heat that feels like it sticks to your skin and won't let go. I was living alone in a small, aging apartment complex on the edge of a mid-sized city. Nothing fancy, but cheap rent and close enough to work. The AC unit in my bedroom had been making this weird grinding noise all week, and on that particular evening, the heat was unbearable. I was desperate to get to sleep, but the fan wasn't doing much to help. That night, around 10:15 p.m., the power suddenly cut out. Just like that, the whole building went dark. The streetlights outside flickered off, the refrigerators hummed to a stop, and even the city seemed to pause. My phone's screen illuminated faintly, but there was no Wi-Fi or cell signal. I was stranded in the dark, alone with the oppressive heat and silence. I reached for the flashlight I always kept in my kitchen drawer for emergencies. I lit a few candles and tried to calm down. The heat inside was almost unbearable now. I opened the window for some air, but the street outside was dark and empty, except for the occasional silhouette of a person holding a flashlight. I sat on the couch, sweat running down my back, listening to the sounds, or rather, the lack of them. The usual distant hum of traffic was gone, replaced by a heavy stillness that settled over everything. After about 20 minutes, I heard footsteps outside my apartment door. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. My heart slammed in my chest. I froze, listening as the steps stopped right outside. Then came a soft tapping on the door. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. The rhythm was deliberate, like a pattern. I gripped a heavy cast iron skillet from the kitchen as quietly as I could, inching toward the door to peek through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. No sign of anyone. I backed away, confused and more than a little scared. The tapping stopped, but the footsteps continued, receding down the hall. I locked the deadbolt and double-checked all the windows. Everything was secure. The rest of the night passed in restless tension. Every creak in the building sounded like a warning. I jumped at every noise, flashlight clenched in one hand, skillet in the other. When morning finally came and the power flickered back on, I collapsed, exhausted. I told my landlord, who shrugged it off. "Must have been some kids messing around," he said. A week later, the blackout happened again, this time citywide. I was more prepared but no less terrified when the same tapping returned. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. This time I called the police immediately. They said they'd send someone by, but with the blackout, resources were limited. That night, I set up a cheap security camera outside my door. When reviewing the footage the next day, I saw a tall man, face obscured, standing just beyond the hallway light. He knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked 3 more. Then he raised a hand slowly, waving before disappearing down the hall. The police never identified him. After the 3rd blackout, I moved out. Years later, I still get anxious when the power goes out. I can't forget the heat, the silence, and the slow, deliberate tapping on my door. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for the darkness. Story the end. The power went out just after dusk on a late October evening. A sudden and unexpected blackout that blanketed the entire neighborhood in absolute darkness. I was alone in my apartment on the 3rd floor of an aging building in the city, a place I had lived in for a little over a year. I had just returned from work, tired and eager to unwind with a cup of coffee and some reading. The hum of the heater was the only sound filling the chilly room as the sun dipped below the horizon. I was in the middle of heating water on the stove when the lights flickered and died. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating even. No streetlights flickered on outside, no distant cars rumbled by. The entire city block seemed to have been swallowed whole by darkness. The first thing I did was pull out my phone, hoping to find a signal or at least a working flashlight app. But my screen remained stubbornly black. Dead battery or no service, I wasn't sure. I tried to turn on the lamp beside my couch, but it was futile. My heart rate picked up a bit. I walked over to the window and pulled back the curtain. The street outside was pitch black, the usual glow of street lamps, storefronts, and passing cars completely absent. The absence of light made the city feel unfamiliar, strange, like a forgotten place. I called my roommate, Lisa, hoping she was still out and could give me an update, but there was no answer. I sent her a message, but it showed as undelivered. The building's emergency lights failed to activate. The hallway outside my door was cloaked in an unnatural darkness. Usually, even during power outages, there was some faint red glow or emergency signage. Not this time. The eerie silence was interrupted only by a soft, scratching sound coming from the ceiling above me. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it steadily grew more insistent, like something dragging its claws across the floorboards of the apartment upstairs. I pressed my ear to the ceiling, trying to make out the noise. Then it stopped. I was about to dismiss it when the scratching started again, but this time it was coming from the wall next to me. I shined my phone's flashlight app over, but the light flickered and died again. I cursed under my breath, fumbling to turn it back on. No luck. I felt a cold draft sweep through the room, though all the windows were closed. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I reached for the flashlight I kept in the drawer, an old, heavy thing with batteries I rarely checked. When I clicked it on, the beam was weak but steady. As I scanned the room, my eyes caught something at the far corner, a shadow. It was darker than the darkness around it, like a void sucking in light. For a moment it felt alive, almost moving. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was my imagination. I tried to calm down, lighting a few candles and setting them on the coffee table. The flickering flames offered a small oasis of warmth and light. Then I heard footsteps, heavy, slow, deliberate footsteps pacing outside the apartment door. I froze. The sound stopped. I crept to the door, listening. Then a slow, rhythmic knocking. 1 knock, 2 knocks, 3 knocks. No one called out. No voice spoke. I was about to say something when a soft whisper came from the hallway, barely audible. "Let me in." My hand trembled as I gripped the doorknob. I wasn't about to open the door, but curiosity and fear waged a war inside me. The knocking started again, faster this time. I backed away and grabbed the bat from under my bed, gripping it tightly. Suddenly, the knocking ceased. The hallway fell silent. I waited, heart pounding, for what felt like hours. Eventually, the power returned, a rush of light and sound flooding back into the apartment. The heater hummed, the lights flickered on, and the city noises resumed. I called Lisa immediately. She had been stuck in traffic downtown during the blackout and was fine. But the memory of that knocking, that whisper, and the darkness that felt like it wanted to swallow me whole stayed with me. Sometimes when the lights flicker or when I'm home alone, I hear it again, and I wonder who or what is still out there, waiting for the lights to go out once more. Story the end. The night the blackout hit, it was late July, one of those stiflingly hot nights when even the slightest breeze feels like a blessing. I was at my apartment on the third floor of an aging complex on the edge of town. The city was unusually quiet for a Saturday night. No honking cars, no distant music, no laughter spilling from bars. That should have been my first clue that something was off. I was home alone. My girlfriend had gone out with some friends, and I had planned to spend the evening catching up on some work and then relaxing with a beer. Just as I was wrapping up a call, the lights blinked once and then went out completely. The room plunged into total darkness, and the faint hum of the refrigerator stopped. I sat there for a moment, stunned, until my phone screen flickered to life with a warning. No service. That's when the creeping feeling started, the one that sits heavy in your chest when something is wrong but you can't quite put your finger on it. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, the beam shaky as I tried to peer through the dark apartment. The windows showed only blackness outside. Normally, you could see the glow of other buildings or streetlights, but there was nothing. No light, no movement, just an oppressive black void. I tried calling my girlfriend, but the call wouldn't connect. I sent a quick text, hoping she'd see it later. The blackout seemed to have knocked out cell towers, too. I decided I should stay put. Going outside in pitch black felt dangerous. Minutes turned into an hour, then 2. The apartment felt unbearably silent except for the occasional distant groan of the building settling. Then, faintly, I heard something, a slow scratching noise coming from the ceiling vent near my bedroom door. It was irregular at first, like a small animal trapped, but then it became rhythmic, deliberate. I wasn't sure what to believe. I'd lived in this building for years and never heard anything like it. Trying to rationalize, I thought maybe a raccoon or a squirrel had found its way into the vents. I decided to ignore it and focus on keeping calm. Then the tapping started. At first soft, then more insistent, on the window closest to my bed. My heart raced. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. No way anyone was outside the window. I shone my flashlight into the darkness, but saw nothing. Still the tapping continued. Tap, 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 tap. I called out, "Who's there?" My voice cracked and echoed against the silent walls. No answer. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't be alone." I dropped the phone, my hands trembling. My skin prickled. How could someone know I was alone? I checked the locks on all the doors and windows, bolting them again, even though I was sure they were locked already. The scratching and tapping stopped as suddenly as they had begun. I told myself it was a prank or my imagination. I sat in the corner with the flashlight, eyes fixed on the door. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps pacing outside my door. They paused. Then came a whisper through the crack beneath the door. "Let me in." I froze, unable to move or speak. The voice was chilling, not quite human. I gripped the baseball bat I kept by the bed and waited, breath held. The footsteps retreated, fading down the hall. When dawn came, the power flickered back on. The normal sounds of the city returned. Cars, voices, birds. But the cold feeling lingered. I called the building manager to ask if anyone else had experienced strange noises. She said several tenants reported hearing scratching and knocking, but no one saw anyone or anything. I never stayed home alone during blackouts after that. Sometimes I still hear the tapping in my dreams. Story. The end. The blackout hit without warning. It was a cool spring evening in late April 2014, and I was living alone in a modest second-floor apartment in an older building on the edge of a mid-sized Midwestern city. The power flickered briefly around 8:45 p.m. and then went out completely. At first, I thought it was just a typical power surge, maybe a transformer blowing or some nearby tree branch hitting a line. I checked my phone, hoping to see some news or updates, but the screen was black. Dead battery. I cursed myself for not charging it earlier. The apartment was plunged into a heavy darkness, the kind where shadows seemed to press against the walls and corners, and every creak and whisper of the old building suddenly feels like it's amplified tenfold. My eyes tried to adjust, but without any source of light, the room felt like a void. I grabbed a flashlight from a kitchen drawer, a small, cheap thing with weak batteries, and clicked it on. The beam barely cut through the darkness, but it was enough to see the outline of my furniture and the narrow hallway leading to the front door. I tried the light switches again. Nothing. I went to the window and looked out. The entire street was dark. The streetlights had gone out, and even the distant glow from other buildings was missing. The power outage wasn't just local, it was widespread. I considered heading out to see if neighbors were affected, but the idea of wandering outside in the pitch black unsettled me. Instead, I sat down on the couch, flashlight in hand, trying to calm my nerves. I could hear the usual city noises, the faint hum of distant traffic, the occasional barking dog, but all the artificial lights were gone. About 20 minutes after the outage, a tapping noise started at my front door. It was soft at first, a slow rhythmic tap like someone knocking lightly, but the pattern seemed deliberate. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 1 tap. I froze. My heart pounded. I whispered, "Who's there?" No response. The tapping stopped. I strained to listen, my breath visible in the suddenly cold air of the apartment. Then, from the other side of the door, a whisper, "Let me in." It was faint, breathy, almost pleading. I thought maybe someone was in trouble, but the voice was odd, too soft, too hollow, and definitely not familiar. I gripped the flashlight tighter, edging away from the door. The whisper repeated, now clearer, "Please, let me in." I wanted to call out again, but my voice caught in my throat. Then from somewhere else in the apartment, the window this time, came the same tapping. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 1 tap. I moved cautiously to the window and shined the flashlight outside. The street was empty, nothing but darkness beyond the glass. I pulled the curtains closed quickly. Suddenly, the tapping shifted to the walls themselves, as if something was tapping from inside the plaster. The sound echoed around the apartment, coming from every direction. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it was impossible to block out. And then the lights flickered on. Not the electricity, but an unnatural pale glow from the hallway outside my apartment door. I stepped toward it, heart hammering, and peered out into the corridor. The hallway was empty, but the walls glowed faintly, as if lit from within. The air smelled of damp concrete and something metallic, like blood or rust. I took a step back, and the glow vanished. I was about to retreat when I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy, approaching from down the hall. I slammed my door shut and locked it, leaning my shoulder against it. The footsteps stopped just outside, then a low scratching noise like nails on wood. I whispered, "Who are you?" No answer. The scratching turned into a tapping again. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 1 tap. I realized with horror that the tapping was a message, Morse code. I grabbed my phone, the screen lit up briefly with 3% battery, and quickly typed "help" into a text message, then sent it to my sister, hoping the signal would hold. The phone died instantly. The tapping intensified, pounding now, a frantic rhythm that shook the walls. Suddenly, the door handle rattled violently. Something was trying to get in. I grabbed a kitchen knife and crouched behind the door. The rattling stopped. Silence. Then a cold breath brushed my neck. I spun around, flashlight beam darting wildly. Nothing. I heard a soft giggle, childlike and eerie, echoing through the hallway. The power came back on moments later, the hum of electricity filling the air. I opened the door slowly. The hallway was empty. No signs of anyone. But on the floor in front of my door was a single wet footprint, small, bare, and dark. I moved out of that apartment the next day. I never found out what caused that blackout or who was trying to get in. Sometimes when the power flickers, I still hear the tapping. Story the end.